Chapter 835. Miao Qi didn't know what to say. Miao Qi didn't dare to admit to a crime like disrespecting the crown pattern. He had indeed spent a lot of effort and resources on the spirit qi clothing he wore to attend the Great Night Assembly. These efforts and resources were meant to make him look more respectable, but he didn't expect it to become a weakness in the hands of others. Seeing that the meeting in the core area was about to end, the Right Minister Wuxia, who was in charge of the inner palace, hurriedly walked forward and bowed to Wang Fuxiang. "Sir, the meeting in the core area is about to end. Miao Qi disrespected the crown pattern and broke the rules of the Great Night Assembly. In order to not delay the Great Night Assembly, I will chase Miao Qi out. I will also inform the current family head of the Miao family of the whole story and let him give you an explanation." Even if Wuxia knew the secret between Wang Fuxiang and Bamboo Monarch, he didn't have to address her as Sir. However, after Xia Chen stamped Wang Fuxiang, even if Bamboo Monarch didn't personally confirm Wang Fuxiang's identity, he still had to address her as Sir. In Wuxia's opinion, Miao Qi deserved what happened to him. This incident was destined to reach Bamboo Monarch's ears. Miao Qi's previous pursuits and the hints from the Miao family's beast creation garden had already annoyed him. This time Miao Qi had offended Wang Fuxiang. Even if Bamboo Monarch was usually gentle, his anger would still reach the Miao family's beast creation garden. Wang Fuxiang wasn't an unreasonable person. She had her reasons for making things difficult for Miao Qi. Wang Fuxiang naturally wouldn't make things difficult for Wuxia, who was in charge of the inner palace of the Great Night Assembly. She didn't want to disrupt the Great Night Assembly either. Thus Wang Fuxiang spoke. "Then I will have to trouble you, Right Minister." With that, Wang Fuxiang turned and walked in Zhang Yingying's direction, ready to catch up with her. Xia Chen followed behind Wang Fuxiang. At this moment, Li Zhonglin and Xia Chen's eyes met. Li Zhonglin winked at Xia Chen casually, and Xia Chen's face immediately flushed red. Xia Chen suppressed the anger in his heart. That damned Li Zhonglin. Even though he wasn't a child, he was still so annoying in his middle age. Xia Chen turned his head and no longer looked at Li Zhonglin. As soon as Xia Chen saw Li Zhonglin, he couldn't help but think about how Li Zhonglin had shaved himself until he was bald when he was 10 years old, and then made him use his spiritual energy to fry eggs on his head. Not only did the damn Li Zhonglin do this, but he also complained that the spiritual energy in his body was too weak after frying the eggs, so the fried eggs were like sugar hearts and not tasty. This was simply going too far. Miao Qi was a pinnacle class 4 creation master after all, so Wuxia didn't use force on him. Miao Qi followed Wuxia out of Yiyang Palace through a special passage. During this period, Miao Qi tried to talk to Wuxia several times, but Wuxia had no intention of responding to Miao Qi at all. Miao Qi thought to himself. Now that he had been asked to leave the Nix assembly, he would definitely be punished when he returned to the clan. He could only hope that Miao Zhuo would live up to his expectations and get into the top 3 in the theory arena. This was also a display of the glory of the beast creation garden. Miao Qi recalled that he had specially instructed Miao Zhuo and felt that it shouldn't be difficult for Miao Zhuo to get into the top 3 in the theory arena if he used the things he had prepared. The Nix Assembly's focus was on the martial arena and the civil and martial arena. Normally, spirit qi professionals who were creation masters would have extraordinary combat strength. Therefore, as long as there was a chance, most of them would choose to showcase themselves in the civil and martial arena. As for those who didn't have the strength of a creation master but had formidable combat strength, they could only participate in the martial arena. This made the civil arena the weakest among the 3 types of arenas. Miao Zhuo was now a pinnacle class 3 creation master, and with the artifact that his father had given him to protect his soul, he could even use his soul to stir the spirit fluid for a short period of time when he was fully spirited. At the thought of this, Miao Qi's face immediately revealed a gratified smile. After the left palm marshal Zhuo Ming grabbed the unconscious Miao Zhuo and left Yiyang Palace, Gao Feng subconsciously used his hand to pat on Lin Yuan's shoulder. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Lin Yuan, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you tell your brother about your identity?" Gao Feng's action made everyone's eyelids, including Long Tao, Li Xian and Lu Jia, twitch. If someone else had patted Lin Yuan's shoulder, Lu Jia would have made a move again. However, Lu Jia knew of Gao Feng's relationship with Lin Yuan. Whenever Gao Feng was with Lin Yuan, he would often pat Lin Yuan's shoulder with a pft sound. Lin Yuan looked at Gao Feng's reaction and laughed heartily. You didn't ask either, did you? Lin Yuan liked Gao Feng's true nature very much. He would say whatever he wanted to say without any pretense. Even when Gao Feng forced Lin Yuan to chat on the phone, Lin Yuan would listen to Gao Feng's complaints about faction development and trivial matters in life with a helpless expression. Gao Feng's frankness would also not make him feel bored. But to be honest, Lin Yuan didn't intend to reveal his identity to Gao Feng at first. However, Gao Feng also didn't take the initiative to ask. After hearing Lin Yuan's words, Gao Feng couldn't help but roll his eyes and look at Lin Yuan with an expression that said, "I want to know now, hurry up and tell me." Lin Yuan looked around and pointed at an empty area in a corner not far away. "Why don't we sit over there and talk? We can also eat something." When Lin Yuan and Lu Jie arrived, it was already 6 o'clock in the evening. Lin Yuan and Lu Jie didn't have time for dinner. Lin Yuan was a little hungry now. In a while, Lu Jie would have to participate in the martial duels, and Lin Yuan would also have to participate in the civil and martial duels. They were bound to experience a fierce battle, so they naturally couldn't go hungry. After hearing Lin Yuan's words, Long Tao, Li Xian, Lu Jie, Gao Feng and Lin Yuan walked toward the corner together. Everyone around wanted to come forward and join the small group that Lin Yuan and Lu Jie were in, but they didn't dare to rashly go forward. Everyone present had seen Miao Zhu's outcome in the conflict just now. If they rashly went forward and angered the noble, they might very well be thrown out like Miao Zhu. At that moment, Sun Ningxiang took a few steps forward and walked to Lin Yuan's side. She put her face close to Lin Yuan's ear and asked softly, "I didn't expect the Moon Empress disciple to be a member of the private faction Sky City." Upon hearing that, Lin Yuan raised his eyebrows. When he saw the affirmative look in Sun Ningxiang's eyes, he immediately denied it but didn't directly admit his identity. Instead, he invited Sun Ningxiang. "Why don't you sit over there with the 5 of us?" Upon hearing that, Sun Ningxiang's eyes lit up. At that moment, in the outer palace, the small group of Lin Yuan, Lu Jie, Long Tao, Li Xian and Gao Feng could be said to be the most valuable group. The second night watch, and there was another night watch later. End of this chapter. Chapter 836. Lin Yuan was the Moon Empress disciple, and Lu Jie was Chief Guard Ye's disciple. 2 of Her Holiness disciples, the only direct descendants of 2 top factions, the destined family head candidates, and Li Xian, the highly regarded eldest young master in the Dawn Cloud Bird niche. In such a group, as long as he casually negotiated some cooperation with anyone, it would be equivalent to a great opportunity for the Immortal Garden. He might even be able to exchange for treasures that could help his grandmother's injuries improve or even recover from her injuries. Along the way to the corner area, Gao Feng already knew Lin Yuan's identity through Li Xian and Long Tao's guidance. However, the way Gao Feng looked at Lin Yuan did not change. He just felt that this world was a little mysterious. It turned out that his brother was actually so powerful. However, Gao Feng immediately understood why Lin Yuan could so easily take out Bronze/Epic Phase and the insect pattern Coral Jade, which was something that only Pinnacle Class 4 Creation Masters could nurture. After they chatted for a while, Lu Jie, who was wearing the Spirit Guard standard mask, got to know Long Tao, Gao Feng and Li Xian, whom he had heard of, due to his relationship with Lin Yuan. This feeling of getting to know the same people with different identities was really quite wonderful. Thinking about Lin Yuan's 3 identities that could be split at will, Lu Jie seemed to suddenly find Lin Yuan's interest. Sun Ningxiang was not bashful in the small group of 5 and quickly joined in the idle chatter of the 5. She reached a cooperation with Li Xian and Long Tao. The Dawn Cloud Bird niche nurtured Flying Species Phase, while the Coiling Dragon Valley nurtured Dragon Species Phase. They had a great demand for plant phase as fodder and spiritual ingredients. Being able to cooperate with the Immortal Garden was also of great benefit to the Dawn Cloud Bird niche and the Coiling Dragon Valley. After communicating with Sun Ningxiang, Gao Feng also decided to cooperate with Sun Ningxiang in his personal identity. He would provide the sea region to help the Immortal Garden expand the aquatic plant phase business direction, while the Immortal Garden would be responsible for the supply of all the plant spiritual ingredients at Gao Feng Shui's Fei breeding base. Sun Ningxiang was quite surprised to reach 3 cooperation agreements at once and expand the Immortal Garden's business scope. He felt that Lin Yuan's thighs were simply too thick, as though there would always be endless benefits by following Lin Yuan's side. At that moment, Lin Yuan suddenly thought of Wen Yu's investigation of the aurora pollen and found that the Daoist Immortal Garden's aurora pollen production accounted for 40% of the market share. Therefore Lin Yuan said to Sun Ningxiang, "Sun Ningxiang, the aurora pollen in the Daoist Immortal Garden should be maturing soon, right?" Sun Ningxiang nodded and said, "In another 2 to 3 months, it will be the cheapest time for aurora petunias to produce pollen." Sun Ningxiang recalled the cooperation between Lin Yuan and the Blissful Sea tribe. At that time, Sun Ningxiang had discovered that Lin Yuan was hostile to the Blissful Sea race. She had vaguely thought of the aurora pollen and had stopped the Daoist Immortal Garden's production of aurora pollen. Through the tens of thousands of small chambers of commerce controlled by the Daoist Immortal Garden, they began to collect the aurora pollen on a small scale in each of the 36 large cities. As a result, the amount of aurora pollen on the market had become a little tight. This was why Sun Ningxiang would inject a large amount of aurora pollen into the market whenever the price of aurora pollen was about to soar. Once Sun Ningxiang stopped injecting aurora pollen into the market, the aurora pollen that had almost been sucked dry would immediately soar in price. Sun Ningxiang told Lin Yuan all of this without hesitation, which was also a small favor to him. Lin Yuan had originally wanted Sun Ningxiang to reduce the amount of aurora pollen in the market in the next few months. Moreover, the Daoist Immortal Garden would pay for the loss of aurora pollen sales. However, he had not expected Sun Ningxiang to make a decision in advance when she heard that he was negotiating with the Blissful Sea tribe. Now it seemed that Sun Ningxiang had become a chess piece to kill the Blissful Sea tribe. Sun Ningxiang controlled 40% of the aurora pollen's market share. In addition to Sun Ningxiang's large absorption, half of the remaining 60% of the aurora pollen was concentrated in the hands of the Daoist Immortal Garden. The remaining part was absorbed by Lin Yuan through the blind trade of the flower brocade pearls. As a result, the aurora pollen, which was a niche spirit material that did not circulate much in the market, was almost completely squeezed dry. At that time, the beautiful image of the aurora pollen would be exposed, and the price of the aurora pollen would skyrocket. What awaited the Elysian Sea tribe wouldn't be as simple as crushing a camel with straw. It was a tragedy of a camel being crushed into minced meat by a giant cauldron. Lin Yuan and Sun Ningxiang exchanged a tacit look, and the Blissful Sea tribe's fate was decided in that instant. Then he looked at Long Tao and asked, "What do you think?" "Big Brother Dragon, I wonder if the Class 4-dimensional rifts controlled by the Coiling Dragon Valley can obtain the 8 Extreme Foreign Insect Emperor Martial Divine Insect?" After hearing Lin Yuan's words, Long Tao did not immediately reply. Instead he said to Lin Yuan, "Brother, I'll go and ask first." Soon after, Long Tao gave a call to the elder in charge of the dimensional rifts in the Coiling Dragon Valley. Since Lin Yuan had mentioned the Class 8 alien insect, the Imperial Armored Martial Divine Insect, he must have a plan for it. Therefore Long Tao could not easily make a guarantee. After communicating with the seniors in charge of the dimensional rift in the Coiling Dragon Valley, Long Tao said to Lin Yuan, "Don't worry. The Coiling Dragon Valley has preserved the complete carcass of an Imperial Armored Martial God insect. There are also law origin crystals excavated from its body." Upon hearing that, Lin Yuan hurriedly shook his head. The Imperial Armored Martial God insect's corpse could not pull a fey carriage. Although he needed the law origin crystals, the law origin crystals dug out of the Royal Armored Martial God insect's body were no different from those dug out of other Class 8-dimensional lifeforms' bodies. What Lin Yuan wanted were fresh Class 8 Alien Insect Emperor Armored Martial God insects in the Class 4 Alien Insect Dimensional Rift. Lin Yuan asked Long Tao seriously, "I wonder if I can obtain 12 living Imperial Armored Martial God insects from the Class 4 Alien Insect Dimensional Rift in the Coiling Dragon Valley." After hearing Lin Yuan's words, Long Tao's mouth gaped open. He did not understand what Lin Yuan wanted a living Imperial Armored Martial God insect for. The Emperor Armored Martial God insect could be said to be the most disliked Grade 8 exotic insect in the Coiling Dragon Valley. The Imperial Armored Martial God insect's combat power was simply too strong. Every time an Imperial Armored Martial God insect appeared, Pinnacle Emperor-class experts would be required to deal with it. Imperceptibly, a lot of the Coiling Dragon Valley's top experts' resources were wasted. Tomorrow I'll start writing about the fight. Good night, everyone. End of this chapter. Chapter 837. Moreover, the carapace of a dead emperor armored martial god insect was too hard and heavy. It could not be used as a metal spirit material. The emperor armored martial god insect's flesh was too tough, and even diamond dragon species phase would have indigestion after consuming it. It was still the same as it was when it went in. Lin Yuan said he wanted a living imperial armored martial god insect. The Coiling Dragon Valley controlled a Class 4 alien insect that would occasionally appear in the dimensional rift. Since there was a chance, Long Tao naturally would not reject Lin Yuan. Brother, it is possible to obtain a living royal armored martial god insect, but it is hard to say when it will appear. At this point, Long Tao's face revealed a trace of difficulty. Imperial armored martial god insects would appear in the Class 4 alien insect dimensional rift controlled by the Coiling Dragon Valley. Pinnacle Emperor class experts could also use phase to kill the Class 8 alien insect Imperial armored martial god insects. However, the Emperor armored martial god insects were fierce and aggressive, as well as possessed incredible strength and destructive power. A peak Emperor stage powerhouse obviously couldn't control a living Emperor armored martial god insect for a long time. Even if he could control a peak Emperor rank expert for a short period of time, he couldn't guarantee that the Emperor armored martial god insect wouldn't lose an arm or a leg. If they wanted to completely control the living Emperor armored martial god insect, they would have to dispatch an Emperor rank powerhouse. Long Tao's grandfather was an Emperor class expert, but it was obviously not appropriate for his grandfather to go to the dimensional rift to capture the royal armored martial god insect and send it over to Lin Yuan. Therefore, Long Tao spoke according to the actual situation. Brother, it's a little difficult to capture the royal armored martial god insect alive. I wonder if the royal armored martial god insect which is slightly injured can be done? Upon hearing that, Lin Yuan hurriedly shook his head and said, "That's right. If it's convenient for Big Brother Dragon, just inform me if you discover the Imperial armored martial divine insects in the Class 4 alien insect dimensional rift. I will immediately send people to capture them." In Lin Yuan's opinion, Endless Summer might not be able to metamorphose into a creation breed Fae before the Great Night meeting as expected. However, with a large number of law crystals, Endless Summer would definitely become a creation seed Fae within these 2 days. Endless Summer comprehended the Enlightenment Law and was adept at mind control. After the Enlightenment Law transformed into the Enlightenment World, Endless Summer could easily use the Enlightenment World's power to control the Emperor armored martial god insect and bring it back to the return from faraway manor. When Long Tao heard Lin Yuan's words, he suddenly felt that Lin Yuan was not just the Moon Empress disciple. Even if he was the Moon Empress disciple, he should not be able to command an Emperor-class expert to do things for him at any time. Lin Yuan's words clearly meant that he could easily command Emperor-class experts at any time and anywhere. Either the Moon Empress doted on Lin Yuan too much, or he had the power of an Emperor-class expert in his hands. If that was the case, then it would be too shocking. When Gao Feng heard Lin Yuan and Sun Ningxiang talking about the Aurora Morning Glory pollen, he recalled that Lin Yuan had asked him to collect the Aurora Morning Glory pollen on the market. At that time, Gao Feng didn't understand what Lin Yuan meant, but since Lin Yuan said it, there must be a reason. Therefore, Gao Feng also collected a lot of Aurora Morning Glory powder. Now that Gao Feng had the insect pattern coral jade that Lin Yuan had given him, he could use it to improve the water quality and nurture the angelfish of bliss. There was bound to be a huge demand for Aurora pollen in the future. However, Gao Feng didn't expect Lin Yuan to ask him to collect the Aurora pollen on the market for such a big game of chess. Gao Feng couldn't help but recall when he had called Lin Yuan to tell him that he wanted to deal with the Sea of Bliss. At that time, Gao Feng had been kicked out of Star Web's private territory by the Sea of Bliss, and he had been furious. Gao Feng's private faction overlapped with the Sea of Bliss's functions, and he wanted to compete with the Sea of Bliss and defeat it. Gao Feng's private faction didn't rely too much on the Gao family's resources, so it wasn't easy for him to go head-on with the veteran faction, the Sea of Bliss. But because he had mentioned it to Lin Yuan had unknowingly started to help him deal with the Sea of Bliss. This undoubtedly made Gao Feng feel rather touched. Gao Feng took out the diamond face storage box that he had prepared and handed it to Lin Yuan. "Brother, these are the 4 Titan mantis that you asked for. After my family's elders' research, they found that, in addition to the advantages I told you before, the Titan mantis also has extremely strong underwater combat strength. The source-type Titan mantis combat strength underwater is a bit stronger than on land. The Titan mantis' speed underwater is almost twice its speed on land. Upon hearing Gao Feng's words, Lin Yuan's eyes revealed a surprised look. The source-type Titan mantis was the contracted Fey that Lin Yuan had prepared for Zhang Xiaobai, Tan Ran, Exen Ying and Lu Pinru. The stronger the Titan mantis was, the better it would be for their future development. It would also allow the Dome Guild Club's reserve team's overall strength to become stronger. The ability to fight on land and water would invisibly increase the Titan mantis value by several times. Gao Feng must have put in a lot of effort to help him get 4 Titan mantis from his family under such circumstances. Lin Yuan also handed a diamond Fey storage box that he had prepared in advance to Gao Feng. Compared to the platinum Fey storage box, the diamond Fey storage box was made into all kinds of accessories, and it was often more convenient to exchange. This allowed Lin Yuan to order a large batch of diamond Fey storage boxes from Ostrich Logistics. Now, when conducting large transactions, Lin Yuan would choose to use the diamond Fey storage box to store the goods. Lin Yuan said to Gao Feng, "This is what we agreed on before." Gao Feng took the Fey storage box from Lin Yuan and checked it. He found that apart from the insect-patterned coral jade that Lin Yuan had agreed on with him, the Fey storage box also contained other items. There were also 2 completely jade-made wooden boards and a heavenly maiden-grade elemental pearl. Gao Feng knew that this was Lin Yuan's reward. When Gao Feng knew that Lin Yuan needed the source-type Titan centipede, he immediately called his grandfather. In the end, while he was making the call, the family had already discovered the Titan Kraken's ability to fight underwater. Taking down 4 Titan Krakens had caused Gao Feng's grandfather a lot of trouble. However, the reward that Lin Yuan was giving him was simply too high. Even if the Titan centipede had the ability to fight underwater, maximizing the value of the 4 source-type life forms would only be comparable to a heavenly maiden-grade elemental pearl. As for the remaining 2 jade-made wooden boards, it was as if Lin Yuan had given them to him for free. This was what he had prepared for himself before he knew that the source-type Titan sea centipede could fight underwater. The first one was even worse. End of chapter. Chapter 838. Through this incident, Gao Feng once again experienced how meticulous Lin Yuan was in handling matters. Gao Feng was a sentimental person and he simply wanted to pull Lin Yuan over for a drink or two. However, Gao Feng wasn't sure if Lin Yuan was going to participate in the duel, so he forcefully suppressed the thought of drinking. Thus, Gao Feng casually picked up the snacks on a tray on the table. Gao Feng looked at the soft pastry in his hand and bit into it. Immediately he felt a strange sweet and sour taste. Gao Feng felt as if he had entered a wonderful house and he quickly said excitedly, "This plate of dessert is way too delicious." The elegant design of these desserts looks very much like the work of the Spirit Food Pavilion, but the taste is completely incomparable to the desserts of the Spirit Food Pavilion. Just now when they sat down they were all talking and hadn't started eating yet. Hearing Gao Feng's words, everyone reached out and picked up a dessert that Gao Feng was full of praise. When Lin Yuan bit down he felt as though the entire lychee orchard had exploded in his mouth. It was as though each of his molars had turned into a lychee tree. His saliva was flowing wildly because of the sweet and sour taste. However, even though the tea and pastries were delicious, they did not make Lin Yuan feel overly amazed. When thinking about Auntie Zhang and Uncle Li's identities, it could be said that Lin Yuan had always been able to eat the Kitchen Fragrance Palace's culinary skills since he was young. The secret craftsmanship of the Kitchen of Fragrance Palace was naturally not something that the food of the Spirit Food Pavilion, which bore the name of the Kitchen of Fragrance Palace, could compare to. It could be said that when Lin Yuan was struggling to survive, his taste had been pulled to a very high position because of Uncle Li's cooking. Later Lin Yuan ate Lu Jie's cooking. After getting used to Lu Jie's cooking, he felt that there was nothing special about the Spirit Food Pavilion's food when he went to the Spirit Food Pavilion again. Long Tao, Li Xian and Sun Ningxiang also felt very refreshed after eating this tea. Although the 3 of them had already eaten dinner, this dessert still stimulated their appetites. Upon hearing Gao Feng's sigh, Lu Jie started to explain. Every tea and refreshment of the Great Night Assembly was prepared by Lord Chef Supreme after he came to Yeong Palace. Otherwise, according to the original plan, the Great Nix Assembly wasn't going to provide refreshments. Instead, they were going to display some spirit fruits. The dessert that you said was delicious should be called Mr. Lychee. When Lin Yuan heard Lu Jie introduce the refreshments, he did not feel anything at first. However, when he heard the name Lychee Gentleman, he immediately raised his brows. He felt that the name of the dessert was a little weird. Gao Feng continued to put the Lychee Gentleman into his mouth as he looked at Lu Jie with a curious expression on his face. Lu Jie coughed lightly as he looked at Gao Feng, who kept sending Mr. Lychee into his mouth. Before I came, Master showed me the process of the Nix assembly. I've also looked through the list of refreshments. It is said that this gentleman lychee's stuffing is made from the platinum fey clear rising lychee tree's red lychee. The red lychee is dried by the heavenly fire. Then the nectar produced by the Qingling lychee tree is used to roast the red lychee flesh and ferment it for an entire 4 seasons to form the filling in the Lychee Gentleman. It is said that this dessert was named by the Chef Supreme's only daughter in the Kitchen Fragrance Palace. It is said that the Chef Supreme's daughter feels that when eating Mr. Lychee, the sweet and sour taste is like the Lychee Gentleman's kiss. The soft puff pastry wrapping the Mr. Lychee is also to repay the feeling at that time. When Lin Yuan heard that, he could not help but think of Auntie Zhang, who lived opposite him in the Xia region and led the terror rabbit to wash clothes every day. He really did not know that Auntie Zhang was actually so romantic when she was young. Gao Feng hurriedly stopped the hand that was about to put the gentleman lychee in his mouth. A strange feeling appeared all over his body. It was not a secret that the Chef Supreme's only daughter was married to the Chef Supreme's eldest disciple. He had eaten at least 10 pieces of Mr. Lychee, so wasn't this the same as being kissed by the Chef Supreme's eldest disciple? Gao Feng, who had a great appetite, looked at the other desserts and lost his appetite. When he recalled that his father had forced him to participate in the martial arena, Gao Feng felt that it was simply too difficult. Gao Feng looked at Lin Yuan and the others inside. Are any of you going to participate in the martial arena? If I encounter you, at least I can just admit defeat. Gao Feng knew very well that apart from him, everyone who ascended the martial arena wanted to show off their strength. If he went to the martial arena, he would basically become a target for others to show off his strength. There was a rule that Gao Feng did not understand at all. The party who admitted defeat had to get the opponent's consent before he could forfeit. Otherwise, he could only wait for the referee's decision in the battle. This was simply too much of a trap for Gao Feng. Fortunately, no matter what, as long as he lost one match in the martial arena, he would be directly eliminated. In other words, Gao Feng would at most be beaten once. Upon hearing Gao Feng's words, Lin Yuan said, I'm going to participate in the civil and martial duels. If it's the martial duels, the young palace lord should be participating. Lin Yuan spoke naturally, but Lu Jie's face immediately turned awkward. Lu Jie did not expect that Lin Yuan would address him as the young palace master one day. That was right. If Lin Yuan called him anything else while wearing a mask, it would be equivalent to exposing his identity. Lu Jie hurriedly coughed and said, I'm not a creation master. I am not a creation master, so I will be participating in the martial arena. As soon as Lu Jie finished speaking, Long Tao spoke up. I want to wait and see if the prizes for the civil arena, martial arena, and civil and martial arena will be announced in advance. If the prize for the civil arena is good, I will directly give up the chance to participate in the civil and martial arena competition. Long Tao's eyes were very solemn when he spoke. Long Tao understood that the Nix assembly this time was not a chance for the disciples of the top forces to display their strength. Even though he was the Radiance 100 sequence number 3, he was still hiding his strength. However, if those two were to get serious, he definitely wouldn't be able to last more than a minute against them. It was precisely because he had the opportunity to fight with those two in the Radiance Sacred Hall that the arrogant Long Tao knew that there was always someone better than him. News of a sacred source life form as a reward for the civil and martial duels had been leaked in advance, but the prizes for the civil and martial duels had not been revealed. Therefore Long Tao planned to choose after seeing the reward. Lu Jie replied immediately. The prize for the One Arena is an island whale that is about to hatch. The prize for the martial arena is a chance to craft a prized artifact from Sir Bamboo Monarch. Lu Jie did not mention the radiant metal that he had received from the civil and martial duels. The second one was even worse. End of chapter. Chapter 839. At that moment, Lu Jie was still feeling sorry for Lin Yuan's radiant light metal. He had thought more than once that it would be great if the Nix assembly could be held 1 year later. Lu Jie's words forced Long Tao to make a decision. If that's the case, then I'll go participate in the literary competition. Even a soon-to-be-hatched world spirit island whale wouldn't be able to match the value of a St. Chi treasure. Presumably, when the time came, most people would participate in the civil and martial duels for St. Chi treasures. This way the competition in the civil arena would be smaller. Most importantly, in Long Tao's opinion, both of them would probably participate in the civil and martial arena. Long Tao asked Lin Yuan in a deep voice. "Brother, have you heard of the names Gu Lang and Zhong Zhe?" Lin Yuan shook his head. Upon seeing Lin Yuan shake his head, Lu Jie explained. Zhong Zhe and Gu Lang are Chef Supreme's and Bamboo Monarch's little disciples respectively. They will be the strongest opponents in the civil and martial competitions, Bu Feng said. Upon hearing that, Lin Yuan immediately matched Zhong Zhe and Gu Lang's names. In the Radiance Federation there were only 13 people who could be called Majesty. So far, 11 of the 13 Majesties already had disciples. Only Lord Cicada Cry and Lord Iron Prison were left without disciples. These two lords stayed in the royal court all year round. As for the other 11 disciples, most of them were over 30 years old. Among the disciples of His Holiness, there were only 4 people under the age of 30 who could be considered as the younger generation. They were Lu Jie, Chef Supreme's little disciple, and Bamboo Monarch's little disciple. Lin Yuan had always regarded them as his greatest opponents in both the civil and martial arena. Lin Yuan had to transform the Dark Death Law into the Dark Death World before the Dark Knight Assembly began because of these two people. As for Li Xian and Sun Ningxiang, they had no intention of going to the civil arena, martial arena, or both. Li Xian was a support-type spirit chi professional like Gao Feng, but he wasn't a creation master yet. Thus, participating in the arena competition was simply asking for a snub. Sun Ningxiang had braced herself to come to the Great Knight Assembly this time, even though she was quite confident in her own strength. However, Sun Ningxiang did not intend to show off on the martial stage when the congealing dew Immortal Garden was in a precarious state. Knowing their plans, Gao Feng's face immediately turned bitter. There were countless people participating in the combat arena, so it was almost impossible for him to bump into Lu Jie at the very beginning. At this moment, Gao Feng felt as if he wasn't his father's biological son. It must have been picked up from the trash bin. For the sake of the upcoming competition, the people chatting among themselves ate some snacks other than Mr. Lychee's. All of a sudden, 12 bells rang out from the depths of Yiyang Palace. Lin Yuan looked at the time and realized that it was already 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock was the time for the civil arena, the martial arena, and the civil and martial arena. At this moment, the chandelier at the top of the Yiyang Palace suddenly went out, and then the ceiling in the middle of the Yiyang Palace was lit up. A blazing white flame was burning in the middle of the ceiling, covered by a transparent crystal shield. The moment the blazing white flame ignited, the outer palace of the Yiyang Palace was as bright as day. Lin Yuan realized that although this blazing white flame could turn the night into day, it was not glaring. However, he could feel the massive energy contained within it. Lin Yuan subconsciously used true data to look at the ceiling and realized that the blazing white flame was actually a top-notch extraordinary flame, blazing sacred flame. Top-notch extraordinary flames had always been produced in Class 5 Abyss Dimensional Rifts, but not every Class 5 Abyss Dimensional Rift would produce top-notch extraordinary flames. Once a strange flame reached the pinnacle, there would no longer be any distinction between nobility and inferiority. Every top-notch extraordinary flame was an extremely precious treasure, and most of them were one of a kind. It was simply too imposing and extravagant for such a treasure to be placed on the ceiling of the Yiyang Palace's outer palace as a lighting tool. At that moment, Zhou Ming, whom Lin Yuan had just met, walked in. Beside Zhou Ming was a man with a strange expression. This man's expression looked as though he had just heard something unbelievable and was trying his best to suppress the change in his expression. The right envoy Wuxia had just sent Miao Qi back to the Miao family's ancestral residence in Ring Beast City, but he didn't expect that Miao Zhuo had already been sent back to the Miao family's ancestral residence in Ring Beast City. Were the Miao family members in the Beast Creation Garden crazy? Why were they always looking for trouble in the Nix assembly? Even the young ones couldn't stop. After Wuxia returned and found out the reason why Miao Zhuo had been sent out, he realized that the aunt and nephew were both better at courting death than the other. Ming looked at the younger generation present and coughed softly. Next up, the Nyx assembly will enter the civil arena, martial arena, and civil and martial arena. In a while, the civil and martial arena will be held first, followed by the martial arena, and finally the civil and martial arena. The civil and martial arena will be held in the cultivation room that has been cleaned. Due to the special nature of the spirit fluid concocted by the creation master, it cannot be shown to outsiders. Everything will be determined by the final result. As for the duels between the combat class spirit chi professionals and the civil and martial duels, Her Holiness and your family's elders will be watching. During the construction of Yeong Palace, the terrain of the outer palace was lower than that of the inner palace. After the blazing sacred flame was ignited, the black crystal wall would turn transparent, allowing the inner palace's people to see the outer palace's performance through the black crystal wall. However, the outer palace's people wouldn't be able to see the inner palace's situation through the black crystal wall. As long as the outer palace's elite faction's disciples and the veteran faction's disciples had the slightest confidence in their strength, they would be prepared to show off their skills in the civil, martial, or martial arena. If the veteran faction's disciples wanted to show off their strength in the Nyx assembly, one reason was to obtain the elders' approval. On the other hand, it wasn't just for themselves but for the veteran faction that they belonged to. If a veteran faction's disciple truly displayed sufficient talent and strength, it would be enough to prove the veteran faction's potential for development in the next few decades. Such veteran factions would usually be able to obtain the support of the elite factions. It was the same situation for Coiling Dragon Valley and Dawn Cloud Avian Nest, as well as Hearthstone and the Four-Legged Beast region. Dawn Cloud Avian Nest and the Four-Legged Beast region were veteran factions. A few decades ago, they had been favored by Coiling Dragon Valley and Hearthstone because their younger generation had great potential. All the veteran factions' disciples and veteran factions' disciples had the same idea. The third watch, everyone good night. End of this chapter. Chapter 840. As for the disciples of the top factions, it was all for the sake of showing off to the elders in the clan and solidifying their status. They were relying on their own strength to display the strength and glory of the top factions. At the same time, before the Nyx assembly started, there were rumors that a certain Her Holiness had the intention to accept a disciple. Although it was unknown whether this rumor was true or not, everyone present, be it the younger generation of the veteran factions or the top factions, mustered up their strength to display themselves to the greatest extent. What if the rumor was true? Everyone hoped that their performance would be seen in the eyes of that Her Holiness. If they were really accepted as a disciple by Her Holiness, they would be able to have the same imposing manner as Chief Guard Ye's disciple. The youth wearing the Spirit Guard's standard mask was a good example for everyone present. Every disciple of the top factions and veteran factions knew that if they could be accepted as a disciple by Her Holiness, their future would be completely different. It was said that there was no such thing as reaching the heavens in a single bound in this world. However, being accepted as a disciple by Her Holiness was really no different from reaching the heavens in a single bound. At that moment, in a training room with walls made of diamond radium uranium steel and inlaid with many black crystals, a man wearing purple clothes with purple bamboo patterns was panting heavily. The man was panting heavily in a purple robe embroidered with purple bamboo patterns. The man was no longer as carefree as usual. He was dumbfounded and gnashed his teeth while shouting, "Zhongzhe, are you crazy? Zhongzhe, are you crazy? You used that move. Are you still going to fight in the civil and martial duels later?" Gu Lang felt that he was simply an idiot. He actually believed the words of Zhongzhe, this battle maniac. In the Night Rain Hall, it's just a sparring session. The real battle will be carried out in the civil and martial arena. When Gu Lang was fighting with Zhongzhe earlier, he still felt that everything was normal. However, after he slightly suppressed Zhongzhe, Zhongzhe began to instruct his Fei to use one big move after another. Back then, Gu Lang simply had no way to stop Zhongzhe. Thus, he could only instruct his Fei to forcefully withstand Zhongzhe's attacks. Otherwise, he would be injured. Gu Lang might be a power offense-type spirit chi professional, but he chose the one-wave rush fighting style. After a wave of abilities and damage, his contracted Fei would need to recover for a period of time before being able to fight again. Although this method could maximize Gu Lang's lethality, The shortcoming was that Gulang was a quick shooter. It wouldn't last long enough. It was also because of the one-wave rushes fighting style that Gulang, who was on par with Zhongzhe, was able to suppress Zhongzhe. Hearing Gulang's words, Zhongzhe's eyes flashed with a fanatical light and he praised Gulang. I originally thought that after a year of training, I wouldn't be suppressed by Brother Gu in battle like before. I didn't expect Brother Gu to grow so quickly in a year. Zhongzhe looked at the burning sky roar that he had contracted and immediately ordered. Burning Sky Ho, use exclusive skill Heavenly Flame 8 refinements. Under Zhongzhe's command, a cute orange mouse that was less than half the size of a palm squeaked on Zhongzhe's shoulder. After that, golden bristles grew out of the cute orange mouse's back. After the bristles grew out, they immediately ignited with 8 kinds of magnificent flames. Hearing Zhongzhe's instructions to the heaven-burning roar, Gulang secretly cursed. With a wave of his hand, Gulang summoned a black shadow that covered almost the entire Night Rain Court's training ground. Gulang sighed in his heart and said softly, "Great Old Squid, use exclusive skill decaying Great Old Ones. At the same time use Flood Cage." At Gulang's command, several giant tentacles vaguely appeared in the huge black shadow. As each tentacle moved, a large amount of water elements actually condensed in the air into heavy water that was far heavier than metal. The black heavy water spun to form a water column. Several black water columns intersected with each other, forming a prison made up of black water columns. However, this overflowing prison wasn't facing Zhongzhe. Instead, it covered Gulang's body. At that moment, the burning sky Ho in front of Zhongzhe seemed to burp and spat out 8 strange flames. These 8 strange flames contained 8 different burning characteristics, and each flame was a high-grade heavenly flame produced in a class 4-dimensional rift. The 8 high-grade heavenly flames burned, turning the Night Rain Court into a scorching steamer. It wasn't over yet. Zhongzhe's hand suddenly reached out and touched the 8 high-grade heavenly flames. Just as he was about to touch the high-grade heavenly flames, a pure red color appeared in Zhongzhe's palm. The moment this red color appeared, it instantly covered the flames of the 8 high-grade heavenly flames and Zhongzhe's red half-body armor. When Gulang saw this red color, he couldn't help but shout angrily, "Zhongzhe! You used a sacred source life form in the sparring session. You used a sacred source life form in the sparring session. What are you going to use to fight the Moon Empress and Chief Guard Ye's disciples in the civil and martial arena later?" As Gulang spoke, a green totem suddenly rose up on his neck under his collar. These green totems rapidly changed on Gulang's body. Just as the green totems were about to form a towering tree, 12 bell tolls sounded in Night Peak Palace. These 12 bell tolls caused Gulang and Zhongzhe to freeze in the Night Rain Court's training room. During the battle, Gulang's words couldn't wake Zhongzhe up at all. Zhongzhe's mind was completely immersed in the carefree battle. However, these 12 bell tolls immediately woke Zhongzhe up. Zhongzhe suddenly withdrew the red color in his palm, and with a wave of his hand, the 8 high-grade heavenly flames were swallowed by the burning sky centipede. Zhongzhe, who had dispersed his aura, was embarrassed and said to Gulang, "Gulang, I'm sorry. Gulang, I'm sorry. I couldn't control myself this time. Thankfully, the 12 chimes woke me up." Zhongzhe always had a serious expression and didn't like to smile. At this moment, his awkward smile made the usually serious Zhongzhe look a little childish. Gulang's eyes were about to roll to the sky. "Who the hell wants to spar with you after that? Even if I, Gulang, can't find a partner and be single for the rest of my life, I will never spar with you again. Sparring with others is just to hone my strength and improve our relationship. Sparring with you, Zhongzhe, is simply killing me." Zhongzhe's stance was easy to disperse, but it wasn't so easy for Gulang. During the battle with Zhongzhe, Gulang's 2 contracted phase had already exhausted their spiritual power. The Great Ancient Squid had also used its exclusive skill, Decaying Great Old One, and its ability, Flood Cage. The Flood Cage was now completely formed. The first one was even more terrifying. End of this chapter. Chapter 841. Gulang originally wanted to use the Flood Cage to protect himself and take on the Burning Sky Centipede's exclusive skill, 8 refinements. Without the exceptional Flame 8 refinements, Gu Lang would need to command the great old squid to use its spiritual power to dismantle the newly condensed heavy water if he wanted to get out of the flood cage. The worst part was that Gu Lang had used his own sacred source life form after seeing Zhongzhe use it. Once Gu Lang's sacred source life form's power was activated, it was irreversible. Even if Gu Lang did not use the sacred source life form's power, the sacred source life form would enter a dormant state within an hour. It needed to accumulate enough energy before it could be used again. Within this 1 hour, the civil and martial duels would not be over. Gu Lang felt that he had been screwed over by Zhongzhe. Now that he was participating in the civil and martial arena competition, he was confident that he would be able to sweep away the younger generation of the veteran and top forces. However, Gu Lang did not know the Moon Empress and Chief Guard Ye's disciples. He did not dare to say that he had the confidence to win in such a situation. He had heard from his master, the Bamboo Monarch, that the Moon Empress had only accepted a disciple for less than a year, and the disciple was still a youth. It had not even been 2 months since Chief Guard Ye had accepted a disciple. However, he could no longer use the sacred source life form, his greatest trump card in the civil and martial duels. Putting aside the strength of the Moon Empress and Chief Guard Ye's disciples, even if he and Zhongzhe were to compete in the civil and martial duels, Zhongzhe would definitely win. If Gu Lang did not know Zhongzhe very well and knew that Zhongzhe was a stubborn person who did not care about anything when it came to sparring, he would probably think that Zhongzhe was tricking him. Gu Lang would probably think that Zhongzhe was playing tricks on him. Looking at Zhongzhe's apologetic expression, Gu Lang resisted the urge to rub Zhongzhe's head. He controlled the great old one squid to remove the flood cage and sighed. "I'll participate in the civil and martial duels later." Scope. The night Che 12 bells have rung. The civil and martial duels are about to begin. When the civil and martial duels begin, don't jump onto the stage and keep defending it. Even if you receive spiritual power replenishment after each battle, according to the rules of the civil and martial duels, the Burning Sky Centipede's exceptional fire cannot be replenished after it is used up. 4 combat class spirit chi professionals, as their strength continued to increase, the types of contracted phase would increase, and the evolution of the phase would become more complicated. Although phase source of power was still spiritual power, some of the accumulated elements would require some time to slowly recover after being released. Gu Lang was in such a situation. Therefore, when he thought of Zhongzhe's stubborn personality, Gu Lang couldn't help but give him a reminder. When Zhongzhe heard Gu Lang say that he was going to participate in the civil arena, he felt a little guilty. Zhongzhe understood that it was because of him that Gu Lang gave up the plan to participate in the civil and military duel arena, so Zhongzhe said, "Brother Gu Lang, if I win the civil and martial arena, I'll give you the sacred source life form and the radiant light metal." Gu Lang pursed his lips. From Zhongzhe's words, he knew that Zhongzhe had only heard the first half of what he said. Zhongzhe didn't even hear what he said after that. Gu Lang was slightly older than Zhongzhe, but Zhongzhe had never called him brother. Now that he heard Zhongzhe call him brother, Gu Lang felt that it wasn't bad to have a stupid little brother. Gu Lang walked forward and said, "Let's go. If you become the champion, I don't want the sacred source life form and the radiant light metal. When the time comes, just make me a meal of the kitchen incense palace's 360 plates for me to taste." Zhongzhe revealed a trace of difficulty when he heard Gu Lang's words, but he gritted his teeth and said, Sure, no problem. But I'm still not proficient enough with over a dozen butterflies among the 360 plates. I'll go back and learn from Master before I make them for you." The Kitchen Fragrance Palace's 360 plates were the essence of the Kitchen Fragrance Palace's culinary techniques. There were 120 sets of tea and pastries, 120 side dishes, and 120 banquet dishes. As the Chef Supreme's disciple, Zhongzhe had naturally learned it before. In fact, the essence of the Chef Supreme's creation master's methods was in the 360 plates. However, Zhongzhe had always put in extra effort as a spirit chi professional, so he was no longer proficient in cooking over a dozen banquet dishes among the 360 plates. He still needed the Chef Supreme's guidance and practice before he could cook those dishes that he was not proficient in. Gu Lang revealed a strange expression when he heard Zhongzhe's words. Zhongzhe was really ambitious. The civil and martial duels weren't just for the younger generation of the top factions and veteran factions. If they were careless, it would be easy for them to fail. However, Gulang didn't remind Zhongzhe about this. If Zhongzhe really failed, he could remember it after experiencing it for himself. If Zhongzhe successfully crushed his way through, then Gulang's words would be in vain. After the civil and martial duels began, the younger generation of Nightyong Palace's outer palace rubbed their palms together. However, the ones who were really nervous were those in the Nightyong Palace's inner palace. They had just met the 12 majesties of the veteran factions and the top factions. At that moment, there were 13 chairs arranged in a ring in the Nightyong Palace's inner palace. 12 of the 13 chairs were occupied by figures of different shapes and sizes. No one was sitting on the chair in the middle, but there was a cell phone on the chair. The cell phone was set to video mode and placed in the middle of the chair. Through the black crystal wall, the people on the other side of the cell phone could clearly see the situation in Nightyong Palace's outer palace. The scene looked a little funny in such an occasion. However, none of the veteran factions and the top factions leaders dared to look directly at the cell phone that was set to video mode. At that moment, a neutral and calm voice came from the cell phone. Qingyue, I haven't seen your disciple yet. How is his strength? Knight Qingyue, who was sitting on one of the 13 chairs, said, very strong. It's just that the arena duels aren't enough for my disciple to unleash his true strength. Upon hearing Knight Qingyue's words, the neutral voice from the cell phone clearly had a trace of anticipation. Since Qingyue said so, I have to take a good look later. Then the neutral voice from the cell phone clearly had a trace of doubt. Qiyu, I remember that you accepted your disciple more than 6 months earlier than Qingyue. You've been hiding your disciple. Now that the duels are about to begin, there's no need to keep it a secret anymore, right? The Moon Empress' expression was calm, cold, and elegant, but her heart wasn't calm at all. The Moon Empress' heart was already in a dilemma when she heard the question. She really didn't know how to describe Lin Yuan's strength. The second was even worse. End of this chapter. Chapter 842. This made the Moon Empress feel that she was not qualified as a master. Even though the Moon Empress knew that Lin Yuan's footsteps had never stopped, she had no idea what level of strength he had reached. The Moon Empress scoffed when she was asked again. This Empress disciple is naturally strong. After speaking, the Moon Empress did not speak further. The Moon Empress had only wanted to bring Lin Yuan to the Great Night Assembly and announce his identity. Thus, she did not deliberately tell Lin Yuan about the civil arena, martial arena, or the civil and martial arena. Lin Yuan was only 18 years old, and in the Moon Empress' eyes, it was unfair for Lin Yuan to compete with those 27 or 28-year-olds in the arena. The person on the other end coughed when he heard the Moon Empress reply. He did not expect the Moon Empress to not reveal her disciple's background. I have already handed the Radiant Light Medal, one of the rewards for the civil and martial arena, to Qingyue in advance. Since this Radiant Light Medal will be given as a reward during the Great Night Assembly, Qingyue will personally award it. The voice on the other end of the phone was calm, but it caused a stir among the veteran factions and top factions management generation. Previously, the Great Night Assembly's civil and martial arenas rewards were only revealed to be a sacred source life form, which was enough to make people go crazy. However, they did not expect that there would be a Radiant Light Medal that was far more important than the sacred source life form. Everyone hoped that their family's younger generation would win the civil and martial arenas championship. However, the veteran factions and top factions management generation understood that it was not that easy to win the civil and martial arenas championship. The Moon Empress, the Chief Guard, the Chef Supreme, and the Bamboo Monarch were the 4 disciples of the 4 majesties. They were the 4 gaps between the civil and martial arenas championship. Thinking of this, the veteran factions and top factions management generation's eyes dimmed slightly. At that moment, the calm voice on the phone sounded again. Cicada Ming, you previously intended to choose a disciple during the Great Night Assembly. Do you have any plans now? A man with a smiling face on one of the 13 seats said. Even though he was sitting there normally, his eyes seemed to be full of smiles. There is something you don't know. Not only has my plan not changed, even Iron Prison knows that I want to accept a disciple. While speaking, the sneering man glanced at the livid man beside him, who looked as though he was owed 5 million radiance dollars. In Cicada Ming's heart, Iron Prison's way of doing things was just like a follower. If he didn't want to accept a disciple, Iron Prison wouldn't want to accept one either. The moment he thought of accepting a disciple, Iron Prison immediately followed suit. He also wanted to accept a disciple to teach. Looking at Iron Prison's face, which looked like he was owed money every day, Cicada Cry felt that being Iron Prison's disciple was a form of torture. However, the sneering man didn't know that his words had immediately caused the eyes of the leaders of the veteran forces and peak forces behind him to suddenly light up. His eyes were filled with excitement. Previously, it was rumored that His Holiness Cicada Cry had the intention of accepting disciples. Now it was proven that the rumors were true. At the same time, he also learned that His Holiness Iron Prison would also choose a disciple in this next meeting. Although he didn't know what the criteria for the two Holiness Iron Prison's disciples were, under such circumstances, the chances of his clan's disciples becoming their disciples had increased by at least 50%. The Radiant Light Metal was destined to be something that the disciples of the Moon Empress, the Chief Guard, the Chef Supreme and the Bamboo Monarch would fight for. His clan's disciples simply didn't have the ability to compete. But now, the opportunity to become the disciples of the two Holiness Iron Prison's disciples was automatically excluded. After all, it was impossible for the two Holiness Iron Prison's disciples to teach a disciple together. Such a situation was no different from openly snatching a disciple. Therefore, these two spots were opportunities for his clan's descendants to fight for. If his clan's disciple became Lord Cicada Ming or Lord Iron Prison's disciple, then he would have the opportunity to compete for the Radiant Light Metal in the future. His clan's disciple could also stand on the same starting line as the other four Holiness Iron Prison's disciples and compete together. Under the gaze of everyone in Night Dawn Palace, the left administrator Zhou Ming was announcing the rules and prizes for the civil, martial and dual duels. Upon hearing Zhou Ming's announcement of the civil and martial duels prizes, Lin Yuan nodded. The prizes for the civil and martial duels champions were exactly the same as what Lu Jie had mentioned. As for the second and third places prizes, they were much worse than the first places prizes. However, they were still very attractive to everyone. Afterward, when they heard about the civil and martial duels prizes, the crowd immediately flared up. The words Radiant Light Metal made Gu Lang, who had just left the Night Message Pavilion and entered the Outer Palace, reveal a gloomy expression again. Gu Lang wasn't a Radiance 100 sequence member, even though he had already obtained a Radiance Medal. Although he had already obtained a Radiant Light Medal, there was never a limit to one Radiance Medal. With a Radiant Light Medal, Gu Lang had the opportunity to participate in the Radiance Envoy selection. However, an additional Radiant Light Medal would undoubtedly give Gu Lang a greater advantage in the Radiance Envoy selection. After Gu Lang and Zhong Zhe entered Night Dawn Palace's outer palace, they immediately became the focus of attention. Lu Jie's status as the Chief Guard Ye's disciple was still honorable, and Lin Yuan's identity was also mysterious. In the end, Lin Yuan and Lu Jie had been watched by everyone for nearly 3 hours. Lin Yuan, Lu Jie and Long Tao also noticed Gu Lang and Zhong Zhe walking into the outer palace. Long Tao said to Lin Yuan after seeing Gu Lang and Zhong Zhe, "The one wearing purple clothes with purple bamboo embroidered on it is called Gu Lang. He's the Bamboo Monarch's disciple. The one wearing scarred half-body armor is called Zhong Zhe. He's Chef Supreme's little disciple." While Long Tao was introducing the two of them to Lin Yuan's eyes were staring at Zhong Zhe and Gu Lang with doubt. For some reason, Lin Yuan felt that the two of them were exuding the aura of sacred source life forms, as though they had just used them. At the same time, Lin Yuan became excited. He felt that it had been a long time since he had felt this hot-blooded feeling. The last time he felt this hot-blooded was when he fought Chen Hongfeng before he ascended the celestial stairway. As a healing-type spirit chi professional wearing the skin of a combat-class spirit chi professional, Lin Yuan was originally a boorish fellow. Boorish fellows naturally liked to fight. Although Lin Yuan had fought once at the All-Star competition, that battle was equivalent to Lin Yuan's one-sided suppression, and it had not been of interest to Lin Yuan at all. Now Lin Yuan felt that he could finally have a good fight. Third time. I like Zhong Zhe so much. End of this chapter. Chapter 843. Seeing everyone's reaction, Wuxia, who was standing beside Zhu Ming, said, "All right, everyone is here. Right, everyone is here. As for the civil arena, martial arena, and both civil and martial arena, there's no need to register. I believe all of you know the rule that everyone can only participate in one tournament. Those who are going to participate in the culture tournament, follow me to the breeding room to draw a topic and nurture the Fae according to the topic. Everyone's topic might be different, but these topics have been considered by the Moon Empress, Chef Supreme, and Bamboo Monarch. Every topic has the same difficulty, and we will be able to see your creation master's strength through the time taken. Therefore, the first to come out of the breeding room will be the culture tournament's champion. Second place, third place, and so on. Once the top 3 are out, the culture tournament will officially end." After speaking, the right palm official Wuxia walked toward a long corridor in the outer palace. In response, many of the veteran factions and the young disciples from the pinnacle factions that were preparing to participate in the culture tournament quickly moved behind Wuxia. Long Tao, who was beside Lin Yuan, also stood up and prepared to move. Lin Yuan, Li Xian, Long Tao, Gao Feng, and Sun Ningxiang cheered Long Tao on after he stood up. Long Tao's face was also filled with confidence. Long Tao's combat strength might be formidable, but compared to combat strength, Long Tao was definitely more confident in his strength as a creation master. Long Tao knew that in terms of creation master education he was inferior to Lin Yuan, Zhong Zhe, and Gu Lang. He wasn't something that the disciples from the other pinnacle factions could compare with. The Long family's Coiled Dragon Valley's creation master's foundation was obvious. Apart from the Moon Empress, Bamboo Monarch, and Chef Supreme, the Long family's Coiled Dragon Valley's creation master's foundation was clear. Apart from the Moon Empress, Bamboo Monarch, and Chef Supreme, the other disciples' creation master education wouldn't be better than him. As the Coiling Dragon Valley's only direct descendant, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his family had poured in all their resources and painstaking efforts to nurture him as a creation master. During the trip to the Leaning Moon Mountain, Long Tao hadn't been able to become the Moon Empress disciple, and his pride had suffered a slight setback. After returning to the Coiling Dragon Valley, apart from participating in the S tournament, Long Tao had basically been in seclusion to increase his strength as a creation master. When Long Tao was concocting the spirit fluid, he realized that he could draw out a small portion of the soul spirit's power when he was in an excellent state. Long Tao knew that he had faintly touched the threshold of a Class 4 creation master. After a few more years of time and accumulation, he was destined to become an outstanding Class 4 creation master. The Nyx assembly before them was undoubtedly a world-shocking event among the veteran forces and top forces. The 50 top forces were still fine as they were all invited. As for those veteran factions, they would have to think of ways to rack their brains to fight for the 100 spots that the Nyx General Assembly had given to the veteran factions. The threshold for the Nyx Assembly was really too high. As a result, there weren't many young disciples in the outer palace. Among the 4 disciples of the 4 majesties, there were 50 disciples from the top forces and 100 disciples from the veteran forces. There were only 154 people in the younger generation of the outer palace. A majority of the youths that were selected by the veteran factions and the pinnacle factions had creation master talents. It could be said that the Dark Knight General Meeting's outer palace was the place with the highest density of young creation masters. However, creation masters were still a rare and esteemed occupation, and creation masters would only make up around half of the 150 youths. With the shocking rewards of the civil and martial arenas, Long Tao reckoned that there would be at most 30 participants participating in the civil and martial arenas. There would be at least 40 youths with the mentality of gambling dogs participating in the civil and martial arenas. While pondering, Long Tao's eyes suddenly contracted as he looked at the right palm official. Long Tao noticed that the Bamboo Monarch's disciple, Gu Lang, was actually walking behind the right palm official, Wuxia. Gu Lang's action didn't just shock Long Tao, it also caused the other veteran factions and top factions youths to turn pale with fright. When Lin Yuan saw that Gu Lang was walking behind the right palm official, Wuxia, he revealed a puzzled expression. In fact, Lin Yuan could clearly see a trace of doubt on Wuxia's face. It meant that the right palm official, Wuxia, didn't expect Gu Lang to return to participate in the civil competition. Long Tao, who was originally filled with confidence, suddenly felt that his confidence had been shattered. The reward for the second place of the civil competition was an island whale that hadn't been nurtured with spirit chi and pure water elements. The reward for the third place was an electric crystal armored tortoise. The electric crystal armored tortoise could condense an electric crystal on the tortoise's shell after absorbing enough thunder energy from the thundercloud. The electric crystal contained pure thunder energy. The purity of the elemental energy contained in the electric crystal might not be comparable to the heavenly maiden-grade elemental pearls and couldn't reach 95% purity. However, the purity could also reach around 75%. Most importantly, the electric crystal armored tortoise didn't need to consume creation master resources to condense the electric crystal on its shell. It only needed to ensure that it could find the thundercloud. It could be said that the electric crystal armored tortoise was a resource spring that didn't require any investment but could continuously feed resources. However, Long Tao knew that in terms of foundation, even the 5 electric crystal armored tortoises couldn't compare to the reward for the second place of the civil competition, which was the island whale that hadn't been nurtured with spirit chi and pure water elements. As for the reward for the second place and the first place, it was far more different than the reward for the third and second place. Although they were both island whales, the island whale that was about to hatch in the first place and the island whale that hadn't been nurtured with spirit chi and pure water elements lacked a lot of creation master resources. The creation master resources needed to hatch the island whale made even the coiling dragon valley, which had the function of a creation master, feel deeply pressured. There had always been an old saying among the top factions and veteran factions. Having an island whale that hadn't hatched yet wasn't considered a real ability. Hatching the island whale was the real ability. Even if some veteran factions with rich foundations obtained the island whale, they wouldn't be able to hatch the island whale without decades of resource investment. The moment Long Tao saw Gulang, he had already given up the intention to fight for first place. However, although Long Tao had given up the intention to fight for first place, he still encouraged himself to do his best to fight for second place. The coiling dragon valley could hatch the island whale that the veteran factions couldn't hatch. Even if the coiling dragon valley already had hatched island whales and didn't need to nurture new island whales. That unhatched island whale was also a strategic class resource that could show its foundation. In fact, the coiling dragon valley could even use the island whale as a bargaining chip to exchange with other factions for foundation class resources that were useful to the coiling dragon valley. The first place was even better. End of this chapter. Chapter 844. Long Tao originally wanted to fight for first place, but now he could only fight for second place. On the other hand, the younger generation members of the veteran forces and peak forces, who wanted to maintain their second and third positions, felt as if they had eaten a bitter gourd. His face turned sullen. Everyone understood a principle, and that was to compete with a Class 5 Creation Master's disciple in terms of strength. Wasn't it the same as courting death? On the other side of the dark crystal wall, the Bamboo Lord frowned as he watched Gulang walk behind Wuxia. He didn't understand what his usually steady little disciple was up to. Based on Bamboo Monarch's understanding of his little disciple should be participating in the civil and military duels. It had been many years since Bamboo Monarch had accepted Gulang as his disciple. Apart from Bamboo Monarch, the other 11 His Holiness and the old man on the other end of the phone had clearly seen Gulang before. Seeing that Gulang was going to participate in the literary contest, even the Moon Empress looked at the Bamboo Monarch. At this moment, Supreme Chef, who was about to eat the melon, glanced at his little disciple. Seeing the expression on Zhongzai's face, Supreme Chef froze. He could faintly guess why Gulang would participate in the one arena competition. Although he felt that his guess was close to the truth, Chef Supreme would not easily reveal his guess. So Supreme Chef changed the topic and said to Bamboo Monarch, "Bamboo Monarch, we don't have the item that can break the misfortune that you mentioned before. However, we still have a pot of 100 Rue wine left. I collected snow water from plum petals in midwinter and stored it in a wine jar. I also chose 100 auspicious flower buds from Fays and used the cold of midwinter to refine it. Then after a winter, it moved to the extreme north in early spring. Until now, the remaining pot of Bai Louis wine has been sealed for nearly 40 years. Even if the auspicious aura in the 100 Rue wine can't cure sister-in-law's body of misfortune, it should be enough to suppress it for a period of time." Supreme Chef had already checked Wang Fuxiang's constitution before sitting down. At that time, Supreme Chef had indeed put in a lot of effort to concoct the 100-grain wine. However, now that he had experienced Wang Fuxiang's constitution of bad luck, Supreme Chef was not sure how long the 100-rui wine could suppress it. Wang Fuxiang, who was standing behind Bamboo Monarch, was pleasantly surprised when she heard Chef Supreme's words. Wang Fuxiang could feel the gazes of every majesty lingering on her for a moment when they entered the inner palace. Among them, the Moon Empress and Chef Supreme's gazes lingered on him the most. In a place like this, Wang Fuxiang naturally couldn't ask Bamboo Monarch if he had found a way to get rid of her bad luck. Wang Fuxiang had spent every second of her life searching for a way to get rid of her bad luck. Wang Fuxiang was well aware of her body of misfortune. After all, even the Class 5 Creation Master Bamboo Monarch had not been able to get rid of his bad luck physique. Instead, he had been affected by it. Thus, Wang Fuxiang did not have much hope of getting rid of her body of misfortune. From the moment she decided to be with Bamboo Monarch, Wang Fuxiang was already prepared to die. Now that she heard Supreme Chef say that the 100-rui wine could suppress her bad luck for a period of time, Wang Fuxiang felt that it was a great blessing. After suppressing his body of misfortune, he could live with Bamboo Monarch for a period of time like a normal person. Wang Fuxiang thought to herself, the 100-rui wine can suppress my body of misfortune for a year. If that's the case, I might be greedy enough to have a child. Bamboo Monarch was originally curious about his little disciple's choice, but after hearing Supreme Chef's words, his thoughts were immediately pulled away. Just as Bamboo Monarch was thanking Chef Supreme, the Moon Empress frowned slightly and glanced at Supreme Chef Supreme. Wang Fuxiang's body of misfortune was innate. There was no need to talk about using the flower buds of 100 auspicious flower phase to brew the 100-rui wine. Even if the 1,000-rui wine was brewed with the hearts of 1,000 auspicious beasts, how long could it suppress Wang Fuxiang's body of misfortune? The most it would take 2 months. The Moon Empress could also produce something like the 100-rui wine, but every time Wang Fuxiang's body of misfortune was suppressed, it would become stronger. The next time it was suppressed, it would be even more difficult. In the Moon Empress' opinion, Supreme Chef Supreme's idea was nothing more than drinking poison to quench her thirst. It would not solve the root of the problem. Right now, the Moon Empress had the attitude of a spectator. Whoever wanted to be the champion of the civil, martial, or martial duels could be the champion. In a while, during the meeting, Lin Yuan would change into the clothes that she had prepared in advance and sit beside her. At that time, she would officially announce Lin Yuan's identity and let the world know who her disciple was. Therefore, the Moon Empress found this pinnacle competition of the younger generation rather boring. The right administrator, Wuxia, looked at the youths standing behind him who were preparing to participate in the civil duels and said, "All right. Since no one else wishes to participate in the civil duels, these 25 individuals will be participating in the civil duels." After speaking, Wuxia walked through the long corridor and toward the back. Gao Feng watched as Long Tao followed Wuxia through the long corridor and disappeared from his line of sight. I didn't expect the civil duels to have no entertainment value at all. Lin Yuan, you are also a creation master who is participating in the civil and martial duels. Do you think this kind of duel with different topics is fair? After hearing Gao Feng's words, Lin Yuan pondered for a moment and replied, "It is fair. If it is a competition of creation master strength, then this duel is fair." Before the intellectual arena, Lin Yuan didn't know the format of the intellectual arena. It could be said that this literary competition was very advantageous to Lin Yuan. This method of drawing questions could allow him to avoid questions like increasing the phase grade to a large extent. However, he wasn't sure if the civil and martial arena's assessment method would be the same as the current one. Gao Feng didn't even have the time to nod when he heard Sui Ming's clear voice. The civil arena test won't end immediately. The martial arena test will begin now. Sui Ming pointed at a large empty space in the center of the outer palace. This is the martial arena. I'll be the referee for the martial arena. Based on the strength of the attack, I will forcefully end the battle after confirming that one side is unable to resist, ensuring your safety. Those who want to participate in the martial arena can stand behind me. Gao Fengjing nodded and wanted to continue asking questions about the one arena. However, after hearing Zhu Ming's words, Gao Feng choked on the question he was about to ask and burped. Gao Feng didn't expect that the civil arena test would start right after the start of the martial arena test. It seemed like he was about to receive a fat beating. There would be a second watch and a third watch later. End of this chapter. Chapter 845. Gao Feng only hoped that he wouldn't be beaten too badly. Otherwise, if his eyes turned black and his nose started to bleed, that would be too embarrassing. He might even get beaten up again by his father when he returned home. Thus, Gao Feng stood up feeling a little uneasy. Just as Gao Feng stood up, he suddenly felt a hand on his shoulder. A low voice sounded behind Gao Feng's ear. "Don't be afraid. If you really can't fight in the arena, just shake your head at Uncle Zhou." Gao Feng turned to find that Lu Jie had stood up with him. Lu Jie was the focus of everyone's attention. Now that Lu Jie stood up and put his hand on Gao Feng's shoulder, Gao Feng, who wasn't particularly outstanding among the disciples of the top factions, immediately became the focus of everyone's attention. When Gao Feng heard Lu Jie's words, he felt as if he had seen his savior. He understood that Lu Jie was going to help him greet Zhou Xian. Gao Feng had always been a carefree person. He didn't think too much and directly patted Lu Jie's shoulder. At the same time, he pulled Lu Jie to his side. Lu Jie also followed the force and stood shoulder to shoulder with Gao Feng. Right now, Gao Feng and Lu Jie looked like brothers. Everyone in the outer palace felt hot. They remembered that Gao Feng and Bureau Chief Ye's disciple didn't seem to know each other before. Why did they seem like real brothers now? This made the younger disciples who wanted to try and join this small circle but didn't have the courage to go up and talk, feel rather regretful. Not to mention whether they could join this small circle, Gao Feng putting his arm around Bureau Chief Ye's disciple's shoulder. Just saying a few words to Bureau Chief Ye's disciple at this time and being seen by his own elders, he could imperceptibly increase his authority when he returned. This would increase their status in the family. In Yiyang Palace, a square-faced man had been watching Gao Feng. He frowned when he saw Gao Feng putting his arm around Gao Feng's shoulder and smiling cheekily. This square-faced man was Gao Feng's father, Gao Pei. Gao Pei couldn't help but sigh. Looks like I've been too lax in teaching Gao Feng. Gao Pei didn't think that Gao Feng had any hope of being accepted as a disciple by the two majesties. But he only had one son. Gao Feng had to inherit the huge Gao family. At this time, it was extremely important to leave a good impression on the 13 majesties. Gao Pei looked at Gao Feng and felt that all the advice he had given Gao Feng at home had been for nothing. Just as Gao Pei was worrying, he heard the Night Palace Master, Night Leaning Moon, who was sitting on one of the 13 chairs, speak. "The one wearing the Spirit Guard's standard mask is my disciple." Night Leaning Moon looked at Lu Jie with a faint smile under her black veil. Night Leaning Moon had only accepted Lu Jie as her disciple for 2 months at the very most. Night Leaning Moon had been constantly improving Lu Jie's strength over the past 2 months. Night Leaning Moon, who had just learned how to be a master, had never paid attention to Lu Jie's life, nor did she know what kind of friends he had. He only knew that Lu Jie cared a lot about the Moon Empress disciple Lin Yuan, and it was almost like faith. Night Leaning Moon was quite happy to see Lu Jie playing intimately with his peers. Night Leaning Moon knew that Lu Jie had been in a gloomy period for 3 years. At the very least, Lu Jie's personality had not been affected by that period. Night Leaning Moon once again opened her mouth and spoke to the people behind her. "The one with my disciple should be a junior from your clan, right? This empress is looking forward to his performance on the martial arena." Gao Pei was originally thinking about how to teach Gao Feng a lesson when he returned so that he would not always be smiling mischievously outside. Now that he knew that his son's arm was around Chief Guard Ye's disciple, Gao Pei felt that his liver was trembling. Gao Pei blinked and subconsciously exclaimed in his heart, "He is indeed worthy of being my son. He is capable." However, Gao Pei was a little puzzled. He had never heard Gao Feng say that he knew Chief Guard Ye's disciple. Given his son's personality, he shouldn't have hidden such things from him. However, before Gao Pei could rejoice, he heard Chief Guard Ye's second statement. This statement immediately made Gao Pei feel conflicted again. Gao Pei's objective of letting Gao Feng participate in the martial arena was to let Gao Feng know that his Fei combination was very limited. Gao Pei had talked to Gao Feng about the Fei combination many times at home. However, as a father, Gao Pei realized that he couldn't convince his son every time. Therefore, Gao Pei thought of letting Gao Feng participate in the martial arena to experience the concept of being limited and weak. Now that Chief Guard Yi had called out his son's name, she even said that she was looking forward to his son's performance. This was supposed to be a glorious thing, but Gao Pei's expression was getting more and more unnatural. How could his son perform? Bureau Chief Ye's words caused the other majesties to look at their sons. If their son went up and got beaten up, wouldn't that be letting down Chief Guard Ye's expectations? Just as Gao Pei was in a dilemma, Gao Feng and Lu Jie had arrived behind Zhuo Ming. Lu Jie moved closer to Zhuo Ming and whispered something to him. Zhuo Ming nodded and said, "There are a total of 75 individuals participating in the martial arena. There are a total of 75 people participating in the martial arena. If no one else wants to participate, then I will announce the rules of the martial arena. The martial arena competition is about to officially begin." Zhongzhe already knew that Lu Jie was Bureau Chief Ye's disciple. Looking at Lu Jie, Zhongzhe's face was filled with a strong desire to fight, and he couldn't help but take a step forward. But then Zhongzhe awkwardly knocked his head with his hand, secretly blaming himself for being impulsive again. If he were to participate in the martial arena competition now, then he wouldn't be able to participate in the civil and martial arena competition later. Zhuo Ming said after seeing that no one else stepped forward. "Since that's the case, let the martial arena competition officially begin. In a while I will first choose one person to stand on the martial ring. After that, the others are free to choose when to step onto the ring to challenge. When everyone has used up all their chances to challenge, the martial arena competition will officially end. The one standing at the end of the martial arena will be the first place. The second and third place will be decided based on the number of consecutive wins." Hearing Zhuo Ming's words, the expressions of the younger generation who had decided to participate in the martial arena changed again. The rules of the martial arena test were indeed a little special. The one standing at the end would be the first place, and the second and third place would be decided based on the number of consecutive wins. This meant that the more capable one was, the later one would go on the ring. Only then would one be able to ensure that they wouldn't be unable to stand at the end due to overexertion. At that moment, most of the disciples from the top factions and veteran factions knew each other's strength. They even knew the abilities and exclusive skills of each other's contracted phase. This made everyone who stood on the martial arena a live target, and it was easy for the weak to take advantage of the weak to defeat the strong. Therefore, it was really a difficult problem to control when to go on the martial arena. Unlike the others who were thinking about when to go on the ring, Gao Feng was about to laugh out loud. In Gao Feng's opinion, he only needed to wait for Lu Jie to step onto the martial arena before surrendering. Lu Jie naturally wouldn't reject his surrender, and he would be able to avoid a fat beating for nothing. Just as Gao Feng was overjoyed, he felt a gust of wind lifting him up. By the time he reacted, he realized he had been sent to the martial arena. Third place. End of this chapter. Chapter 846. Gao Feng, who was in the middle of the arena, was dumbfounded. When he had been lifted by a gentle wind, he had been a little flustered. However, when he saw Lu Jie on the arena, he already knew what had happened. He had been chosen by Zhuo Ming to be the first to stand on the martial ring. If it was said that Gao Feng almost laughed out loud before, then right now, Gao Feng's entire face was completely wrinkled like a shriveled eggplant. He was just short of crying out loud. Lu Jie looked at Gao Feng, who was the first to stand on the martial ring and wait for the others to challenge him. When Lu Jie had greeted Zhuo Ming, he had only said a simple sentence. "Uncle Zhuo, if Gao Feng nods to you and admits defeat, you can consider him forfeiting the martial ring and ask him to step down." There was nothing wrong with Lu Jie's words, but Lu Jie had not known the martial ring's rules before speaking to Zhuo Ming. Zhuo Ming had also analyzed Lu Jie's words in his heart. He knew that Gao Feng should not be strong, but he did not know why he had to participate in the martial ring. Zhuo Ming did not understand. However, since Lu Jie had asked him for such a small matter, Zhuo Ming naturally had to do his best. The rules of the martial arena would determine the strength of the challengers in the later stages of the martial arena. Therefore, Zhuo Ming wanted to let Gao Feng be the first to stand on the stage. This way, even if Gao Feng was weak, he might be able to win one or two matches. Seeing Lu Jie looking at him, Zhou Ming smiled and nodded at Lu Jie. If Lu Jie was not wearing the Spirit Guard's standard mask, Lu Jie would have facepalmed. Looking at Gao Feng, who was at a loss, Lu Jie thought that he should be the first to stand on the martial ring and challenge Gao Feng. He could also allow Gao Feng to display his full strength first. Lu Jie knew that Gao Feng was a pure support-type Spirit Chi professional. Therefore, once Gao Feng pulled out his contracted support Fei formation, it would be reasonable even if he took the initiative to admit defeat. Lu Jie did not plan to summon the Insect Queen in the martial ring. After summoning the Insect Queen, he would have to produce the insect swarm and get into a fighting stance. If he really fought like that, the Spirit Guard's standard mask on his face would be for nothing. Others could easily identify themselves through the Insect Queen they summoned and the swarm of insects spawned by the Insect Queen's skill. Even if there was more than one Insect Queen in the world, it was an impossible coincidence for two Insect Queens to have the same abilities. This time, Lu Jie planned to use his newly obtained power to fight against the Insect Queen's carcinoma Fei. He wanted to use this opportunity to test his power as the ultimate weapon. Furthermore, the carcinoma Fei that he was controlling would need to go through a few battles on the martial stage in order to display its full strength. If he could replenish his spiritual power after every match, then it wouldn't be difficult for him to defend the ring continuously. Even if someone found out about his Insect Queen's insect-type carcinoma Fei through combat and countered it, he wouldn't be afraid. This was because apart from the dead soul caterpillar that Lu Jie had revealed when he had attacked Miaozhua, he had yet to reveal the other 7. Just as Lu Jie was about to step into the combat ring, he realized that someone had already entered the combat ring before him. Lu Jie couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for Gao Feng. Zhou Ming didn't know what Lu Jie was thinking. When he saw that someone had already entered the combat ring to challenge Gao Feng, he spoke. The first round of the combat ring will now begin. The combat ring's rules are the same as the Star Web Celestial Stairway Challenge's rules. If you are a healing-type Spirit Chi professional or support-type Spirit Chi professional, you can choose to increase the distance and summon your Fei first. Gao Feng hurriedly replied. I am a support-type Spirit Chi professional. I request to increase the distance. After speaking, Gao Feng backed off and took a deep breath. He looked at the fatty in front of him with a resolute gaze. Gao Feng didn't want to be beaten up in the combat ring, but he wasn't going to just wait for death. Gao Feng didn't recognize the fatty in front of him, but based on the emblem on his Spirit Chi clothing, he could tell that this fatty wasn't a disciple from a top faction. When he thought about being beaten up by a veteran faction's disciple, Gao Feng decided that even if he lost, he had to lose with dignity. The most dignified way to lose was to prove one's worth in the combat ring. Thus, Gao Feng waved his hand and 2 massive green lilies bloomed beside his feet. After the 2 cyan lilies bloomed, they were like 2 springs, each spurting out 2 streams of spirit spring water. As the spirit springs spewed out, the entire combat ring was filled with a large amount of Spirit Chi. The spirit springs might not have increased the concentration of Spirit Chi on the combat ring, but the massive Spirit Chi created a Spirit Chi storm on the combat ring. At that moment, a massive hibiscus bloomed in front of the 2 lilies. The hibiscus bloomed with a breeze, and the breeze was like a pair of invisible hands that kneaded the 2 spirit springs into threads. Finally, each of the spirit springs turned into a stream of Spirit Chi, and hundreds of Spirit Chi streams revolved above the hibiscus. All of a sudden, the Spirit Chi that was spreading out from the combat ring to the surroundings of Night End Palace gathered in front of Gao Feng. At the same time, he used true data to check the Fei that Gao Feng had summoned. The breeze hibiscus was a Fei that Gao Feng already had. As for the 2 spirit spring lilies, Gao Feng had exchanged for the floating island whale and 3 young elemental shellfish from Lin Yuan. Of course, the Fei that Gao Feng had exchanged with Lin Yuan was not as simple as the 2 spirit spring lilies. There was also a yellow spring lily that Gao Feng had yet to summon. Gao Feng had told Lin Yuan that he had comprehended 2 willpower runes so far. The breeze hibiscus that Gao Feng had summoned was a Platinum 7/Fantasy 2 Fei. As for the 2 spirit spring lilies, they had yet to transform into fantasy breeds, but their grades had reached Silver X/Legend. The 2 spirit spring lilies did not continue to increase in grade, so Gao Feng must have deliberately suppressed their grades. It seemed that Gao Feng also wanted to evolve these two spirit spring lilies into fantasy breeds. Otherwise he would not have deliberately suppressed their grades. In that case, the yellow spring lily that Gao Feng had not summoned should now be a fantasy breed Fae. Just as Lin Yuan was checking the Fae that Gao Feng had summoned, whether it was the younger generation that was participating in the combat ring or the younger generation that was preparing to participate in the civil and martial ring, they all looked at Gao Feng with a "Are you kidding me?" expression. The first one was even worse. End of this chapter. Chapter 847. Putting aside the strength of the three Fays that Gao Feng had summoned, the key was that these three Fays did not have any combat ability. Gao Feng could not possibly rely on restoring the opponent's Fays' spiritual power and cause them to explode, right? Even if Gao Feng lost his mind, he would not be able to do so. When the Fays' spiritual power was full, receiving the Spirit Qi recovery ability would not be of any use. This was common sense, and it was impossible for Gao Feng not to know. Therefore, Gao Feng's actions were even more confusing in the eyes of the younger generation. Not only the Night Palace's outer palace, but even the inner palace's top factions and veteran factions management generation were shocked when they saw Gao Feng's phase. Many people's gazes also fell on Gao Pei. Night Leaning Moon looked at Gao Feng and felt a little playful. She had just said that she was looking forward to Gao Feng's performance, and Gao Feng had already entered the martial ring. However, with Gao Feng's current pure support ability, Night Leaning Moon could not see any room for maneuver. Gao Feng, who was standing on the martial ring, raised his hand and was about to summon the yellow spring lily. However, his hand paused. The yellow spring lily could be considered Gao Feng's secret trump card. When Gao Feng had contracted the yellow spring lily, he had not even told his father. After some consideration, Gao Feng decided not to show it in such a situation. It would be fine if the yellow spring lily could save his defeat, but now even if he summoned it he would not have any chance of winning. At that moment, Iron Prison, who was sitting on one of the 13 seats in the Night Palace's inner palace, looked at Cicada Cry with a gloomy expression as though he was owed money. You have also contracted 2 of the 3 Fays that this kid summoned. Seems like the 2 of you are fated. Cicada Cry ignored Iron Prison and shook his head gently. Cicada Cry was a support-type Spirit Qi professional and was the absolute soft support among support-type Spirit Qi professionals. However, after seeing the phase that Gao Feng had displayed, Cicada Cry felt that Gao Feng was not smart. In order to be a good soft support, the most important thing was to be soft and be able to play a strategic role that could cover up one's weakness. Only by grasping the irreplaceable strategic significance of a team could they continue down the path of soft support. Iron Prison's words were directed at Cicada Cry, but Cicada Cry did not reply. However, the leaders of the peak forces and veteran forces behind him felt a huge storm in their hearts. It could be said that among the 12 His Holiness present, including the old man on the other end of the phone, the ones who could attract the attention of the leaders of the veteran forces and top forces the most were His Holiness Cicada Cry and His Holiness Iron Prison, who planned to take in disciples. Now that the word fate came out, everyone started guessing. However, Gao Pei did not look happy at all. Gao Pei had always been extremely dissatisfied with the path Gao Feng had taken. When Gao Pei saw his son summon a Fei, even he didn't find it amazing. Gao Pei did not think that His Majesty Cicada Cry would take a liking to a brat like Gao Feng. The left administrator, Zhou Ming, looked at Gao Feng with his mouth twitching. He even stole a glance at Lu Jia. When Zhou Ming saw Gao Feng summoning a Fei, he knew that his good intentions had caused a disaster. When the fatty who was standing opposite Gao Feng saw the Fei that Gao Feng had summoned, he was overjoyed. He took 2 steps forward and revealed a very shrewd smile. Wang An had participated in the martial contest to show his face in front of his elders. It was also good that he would have an advantage and confidence when competing with his siblings. Wang An had chosen to challenge Gao Feng first because he knew that Gao Feng was a support-type Spirit Qi professional. However, Wang An was not clear about Gao Feng's contracted Fei. It was only now that Wang An knew that Gao Feng was actually a rare soft support among support-type Spirit Qi professionals. Gao Feng had completely become Wang An's target, and he could use the 3 flowers at Gao Feng's feet to display his strength. Wang An laughed heartily and waved his hand to summon all 4 of his contracted Feis. Since Wang An could be selected by a veteran faction to participate in the Great Night Assembly, he naturally had some capabilities. The strongest Fae that he summoned was a Platinum 9/Fantasy Eye Blizzard Tongue Shell. The second strongest was a Platinum 4/Fantasy Eye Glacier Hidden Shark. The remaining two were similar to Gao Feng's contracted Spirit Spring Lilies. They were both Silver X/Legend Faes. It could be said that as a descendant of a veteran faction, the lineup of Faes that Wang An could summon was much stronger than Gao Feng, who came from a top faction. Wang An understood that the best way to demonstrate his strength was to ignore everything else and unleash the strongest attack he could muster at the moment. With Zhou Ming, who was acting as the match's savior, Wang An did not need to hold back. He did not need to be afraid that his all-out attack would injure Gao Feng, who was a soft support. Lin Yuan's expression changed when he saw the Faes that Wang An had summoned. Wang An's highest mid-grade Fae was the Platinum 9/Fantasy Eye Blizzard Tongue Shell. However, among Wang An's contracted Faes, the strongest was definitely the Platinum 4/Fantasy Eye Glacier Hidden Shark. The Glacier Hidden Shark was an extremely rare deep-sea Fae. It was one of the few species of shark species Faes that could survive in the deep sea of the extreme north. When the Glacier Hidden Shark's extreme cold aura burst out, it could instantly condense a glacier through water vapor. Moreover, Wang An's contracted fantasy breed Glacier Hidden Shark's two exclusive skills were also extremely outstanding. The first exclusive skill, Ice Layer Bite, allowed the Glacier Hidden Shark to hide in the layer of ice and use all of its strength as the price to launch an ice-breaking attack from under the layer of ice. The second exclusive skill, Hunger Chill, allowed the Glacier Hidden Shark to absorb the cold aura from other ice-type Faes to increase its attack strength. Upon seeing these two exclusive skills, Lin Yuan knew that although the Glacier Hidden Shark was only Platinum 4/Fantasy Eye, it could already engage in cross-grade combat after using its exclusive skills, Hunger Chill and Ice Layer Bite. Even though Ice Layer Bite used all of its strength to launch an attack, any Fae that could engage in cross-grade combat meant that it had extremely strong potential. At that moment, Lin Yuan's pupils suddenly contracted. He saw that Wang An was making the Platinum 9/Fantasy Eye Blizzard Tongue Shell open its hard shell, revealing the extremely soft body inside. The Platinum 4/Fantasy Eye Glacier Hidden Shark used its exclusive skill Hunger Chill to bite the Blizzard Tongue Shellfish's flesh. Immediately, Lin Yuan understood what Wang An was doing. Wang An wanted the Glacier Hidden Shark to devour a large amount of the Blizzard Tongue Shell's flesh before using its strongest Glacier Bite. The second was even more powerful. End of this chapter. Chapter 848. It was understandable that everyone present wanted to better display their strength in the martial arena, but Wang An's method was too radical. This wasn't the Star Web, and the Glacier Hidden Shark's nibbling on the Blizzard Tongue Shellfish was truly harmful. Wang An's current behavior showed that he was very indifferent toward his contracted Faes. If it had been Lin Yuan, he would never have been so ruthless to his contracted Fae. What's more, Wang An's actions were in a situation where his victory was already decided. Seeing Wang An skillfully letting the Glacier Hidden Shark chew on the Blizzard Tongue Shellfish without even batting an eyelid, it was clear that this was not the first time he had done this. When the Blizzard Tongue Clam was on the verge of death, Wang An stopped the Glacier Hidden Shark. Gao Feng frowned uncontrollably when he saw Wang An's actions. Gao Feng didn't like Wang An's attitude toward his contracted Fae, but at the same time, Gao Feng's eyes had a glint. At this time, Gao Feng heard Wang An shout, "Glacier Hidden Shark, use exclusive skill, Ice Layer Bite." Following Wang An's command, the entire martial ring was quickly covered with a layer of ice. Immediately after, the glacier diving shark plunged into the ice, and several dark shark shadows appeared under the ice. It seemed like one of these shark shadows would break through the ice layer at any time and launch a fatal attack on Gao Feng. The left minister, Zhou Ming, was also prepared to protect Gao Feng at any time. From Zhou Ming's point of view, there was no longer any suspense in the first match of the martial arena. Gao Feng raised his hand and said softly when a shark shadow suddenly accelerated towards Gao Feng. "Yellow Spring Lily, use soul-cleansing spring soup and yellow spring reincarnation." Gao Feng's sudden order made Zhou Ming, who was about to attack, hesitate. However, Ming instantly saw through the situation and stopped rescuing Gao Feng. In an instant, the sound of ice breaking and a loud crash rang out. The cold ice fog directly enveloped the place where Gao Feng was, making it impossible to see the situation inside. As the mist dissipated, everyone saw that Wang An's glacier hidden shark had actually crashed into his contracted blizzard tongue shells. Since the glacier hidden shark's exclusive skill, Glacier Bite, would exhaust all the energy in its body, the glacier hidden shark had completely lost its combat ability. At this time, there were two huge penetrating holes on the body of the glacier hidden shark lying on the ground. These two huge holes were obviously caused by the two sharp sword-like protrusions on the blizzard tongue shell. On the other side, the blizzard tongue clam was also heavily injured. One side of the shell was shattered by the glacier hidden shark's exclusive skill, Ice Layer Bite, and even the flesh inside was exposed. However, the Platinum 9/Fantasy Eye Blizzard Tongue Shellfish was a shellfish fae that was born with extremely strong defense. In addition, its grade was higher than the glacier hidden shark's, so it barely survived this attack. At this time, the blizzard tongue shellfish's flesh opened up, and Gao Feng came out with 4 fresh flowers in his hands. Gao Feng's body was stained with the mucus on the blizzard tongue shellfish's flesh, making him look a little wretched. However, he was in for a penny, in for a pound. He immediately commanded the blizzard tongue shellfish, which barely had a breath left, to use the cold snow thorn on Wang'an and the 2 silver X/legend phase at his feet. Wang'an was frozen on the spot by this sudden change of events. He simply couldn't understand how his contracted blizzard tongue shellfish had recovered in one piece and protected Gao Feng. Without the blizzard tongue shellfish and the glacier hidden shark, Wang'an couldn't rely on the 2 silver X/legend phase to resist the cold snow thorn's attack. The left palm envoy Zhou Ming flashed and appeared on the martial arena. After casually dispersing the cold snow thorn, he looked at the withered yellow lily in Gao Feng's arms and said, "The first match is won. The defending side wins the first round. The arena defender, Gao Feng, has a winning streak of 1 match." Lin Yuan was looking at the yellow spring lily's true data, which Gao Feng had suddenly summoned to change the situation. Fey name: Yellow Spring Lily, Fey species, Stamen/Liliace, Fey grade, Platinum 5 out of 10, Fey type, Wood, Fey quality, Fantasy Eye skills: Frowny face, heart invigorating fragrance. The petals release a large amount of fragrance. After the fragrance is inhaled by the marked target, the fragrance will turn into spiritual energy in the target's body and recover spiritual energy consumption. Charged pollen. The pollen in the center of the petals will absorb excess spiritual energy. The pollen filled with spiritual energy can increase the effects of skills. Underworld Spring Eye. Creates an underworld spring eye on the target. The underworld lily will then transmit spiritual power into the target's body through the underworld spring eye to help the target recover the consumed spiritual power. Yellow Springs Reincarnation. When the marked Yellow Springs spring eye's target is in a state of near death, the Yellow Springs eye can plant itself on the target's body. By sacrificing itself, the Fey in the state of near death will recover to a state of complete victory. Parasite Seed Recovery. When one's spiritual power is exhausted, the main body can turn into a seed and parasitize a Fey of the same origin. By absorbing the same origin Fey's spiritual power, one can recover to a state of complete victory. Exclusive skill: Frowny Face, Transparent Spirit Plant Body. Wraps the roots around a plant of the same origin. It can accept a large amount of spiritual power in the plant of the same origin for a short time and transmit the spiritual power to the petals to enhance the skill's effect. Soul Cleansing Spring Soup. The Yellow Springs lily can revive a Fey in a state of near death. Through the pollen's unique soul cleansing effect, it can control the reincarnated Fey until the reincarnated Fey enters a state of near death again. After seeing the Yellow Springs lily's true data, Lin Yuan could not help but slap his thigh. This exclusive skill that the Yellow Springs lily obtained after becoming a fantasy breed is simply too good. When Gao Feng had taken the Yellow Springs lily from Lin Yuan, it had already reached Bronze X/Epic. Therefore, Lin Yuan knew about the Yellow Springs lily's first exclusive skill, Transparent Spirit Plant Body. However, he did not expect that the exclusive skill Soul Cleansing Spring Soup which the Yellow Springs lily obtained after becoming a fantasy breed fae, would allow it to not only revive its own fae in a state of near death, but also revive the enemy fae in a state of near death. It could also control the enemy fae in a state of near death in its own hands. It could be said that with Acheron Lily's help, Gao Feng was already an outstanding support player. Gao Feng looked at his hands and a carefree smile suddenly appeared on his face. He first laughed and waved at Lu Jia before turning around and waving at Lin Yuan. I actually won. At this time, the person who felt the most incredulous about Gao Feng's victory was Gao Pei, who was in the inner palace. Gao Pei did not know that his son, Gao Feng, had actually contracted a Platinum V/Fantasy I Yellow Spring Lily. While Gao Pei was still in shock, Cicada Cry, who was sitting on the 13th chair, glanced at Iron Prison. A different expression appeared in his smiling eyes. You're right, this kid and I are quite fated. The third one. Does everyone think that the main characters of the Wushu Arena and the Cultural Relic Arena should be written in more detail? End of chapter. Chapter 849. The smiling man's fingers rhythmically tapped on the armrest of the chair as he spoke. Iron Prison, who was familiar with the chirping of cicadas, could tell at a glance that the chirping of the cicadas was extremely joyful. Cicada Ming's words caused the leaders of the veteran forces and top forces behind him to lose their composure. Their eyes were filled with envy as they looked at the shocked Gao Pei. At this moment, Gao Pei's shocked expression also had an indescribable ecstasy. Although His Holiness Cicada Cry, one of the 13 His Holiness, always had a smiling face, there seemed to be a smile in his eyes that could not be hidden. However, His Holiness Cicada Cry was exceptionally cold to the leaders of these top forces, so it was very difficult to build a relationship with them. At that time, Iron Prison had casually said that Gao Feng and Cicada Cry were fated, but Gao Pei had only treated it as a joke. No one knows a son better than the father. Gao Pei thought that he knew Gao Feng's capabilities very well. But now his son had summoned a fae that even he, his father, didn't know about. Thinking of this, Gao Pei felt that he had to beat Gao Feng up again when he got home. This brat actually hid such a good thing from his father. Just as he was thinking about this, Gao Pei suddenly froze. Gao Pei recalled that a few months ago, Gao Feng had said that he wanted to take some resources from the family in exchange for a bronze/epic fae that he could contract. Thus, he had taken away an island whale that couldn't be hatched and 3 young elemental shellfish. A few days later, he had asked Gao Feng what faes he had exchanged for. When he saw the 2 spirit spring lilies that Gao Feng had summoned, he couldn't control his emotions and had extended his palm. At that time, Gao Feng seemed to have something to say to him, but he was interrupted by him and gave him a backhand slap on the ass. Gao Pei felt a little awkward. However, despite the awkwardness, Gao Pei had already straightened his back and welcomed the envious gazes of the other veteran and peak forces leaders with a smile. Gao Pei was used to the envious gazes of the leaders of the veteran forces. However, because the Gao family had always been ranked at the bottom of the top forces, they had only started to develop the deep-sea resources in the past few years. Therefore, the leaders of the top 20 forces really didn't think much of him. Now, feeling the envious gazes of the leaders of the top forces, Gao Pei felt that his son, Gao Feng, was simply too outstanding. Of course, Gao Feng's hard work was all thanks to him. Night Leaning Moon had said that she was looking forward to Gao Feng's performance, but she didn't expect that Gao Feng would really give her a pleasant surprise. Night Leaning Moon praised him. He's neither arrogant nor rash, and he's able to grasp opportunities at critical moments. If he's properly trained, it's very likely that he'll become a top soft support. As she spoke, Night Leaning Moon looked at Cicada Cry. The meaning behind her words made it seem like Night Leaning Moon was recommending Gao Feng to Cicada Cry. Before the cicada could reply, the Moon Empress, who usually didn't speak much, suddenly spoke. The breeze hibiscus is the core that gathers spiritual energy. The 2 spirit spring lilies are the spiritual energy springs, and the yellow spring lily can be considered a trump card that increases the team's tolerance for mistakes. Such a combination of faes can already be considered a basic fae system. Cicada Cry, if you teach him well, even if he can't become a Radiance Envoy, he should be able to enter the Radiance Light Knights and become one of the 10 members. The Moon Empress words stunned everyone once again, including Cicada Ming. Cicada Ming didn't understand why the arrogant and cold Moon Empress would praise Gao Feng. Gao Feng was a good seedling and Cicada Ming rather admired him. However, Cicada Ming felt that Gao Feng wasn't enough to make the Moon Empress look favorably upon him. However, the Moon Empress' words made Cicada Ming ponder. Each of the 5 Radiance envoys had to be combat-class spirit chi professionals with powerful comprehensive qualities. A soft support like Gao Feng wouldn't be able to occupy a spot among the Radiance envoys no matter how strong he was. However, the Radiance Light Knights didn't test comprehensive strength. If Gao Feng could form a contract with a sacred source life form that was suitable for him, it would not be impossible for him to enter the Radiant Light Knight squad. Gao Pei had already become the most envied person in the Nightfall Palace, and 3 Her Majesties had actually praised Gao Feng's potential. Such praises for potential were often more enviable than praises for strength. Apart from Gao Pei, the veteran and pinnacle factions management generation couldn't help but feel depressed. They were originally happy that the 2 Her Majesties had the intention to accept disciples. Now that the martial arena had just started, one of the spots had already been vaguely determined. The Moon Empress' cold gaze passed through the black crystal wall and landed on Lin Yuan, who was waving at Gao Feng. She couldn't help but reveal a warm smile. The Moon Empress had said those words because Gao Feng's contracted yellow spring lily fantasy breed exclusive skill had a strong strategic significance. Another reason was because Gao Feng and Lin Yuan were friends. The Moon Empress's own disciple was the latest batch among the Her Majesties. Furthermore, the Moon Empress disciple Lin Yuan was currently the youngest among all the Her Majesty's disciples. Therefore, Lin Yuan would always be at a disadvantage when competing with others. Lin Yuan and Lu Jia were now a small group. If Gao Feng could be accepted as a disciple by Cicada Ming, he would naturally be a member of Lin Yuan's small group. With each important member in the small group, Lin Yuan would have more power. It was for Lin Yuan's long-term consideration that the Moon Empress had said those words. However, whether Cicada Ming would accept Gao Feng as a disciple or not was up to him. At that moment, Gao Feng, who was in the martial ring, was still excited about the unexpected victory. The other younger generation participants were also eager to go up the martial ring to kill Gao Feng. However, it was a little too early to go up the martial ring. After killing Gao Feng, he would be defeated in the next match. After all, the others weren't fools. If they were weaker than him after he displayed his strength, they naturally wouldn't go up the stage to challenge him. After Zhou Ming summoned a spirit chi professional wearing the spirit guard's uniform to replenish Gao Feng's spiritual power, he immediately announced, "Now the others can go up the martial ring to challenge me. Now the others can go up the martial ring to challenge me." As soon as Zhou Ming's voice fell, Lu Jia leaped onto the martial arena stage. Gao Feng's eyes were filled with gratitude when he saw Lu Jia going up the stage. He knew that Lu Jia was going up the stage to save him a beating. At the same time, Gao Feng let out a deep breath. Fortunately, Gao Feng had heard from Lu Jia that he needed to go through a few matches before he could fully spread out his strength. Otherwise, if Lu Jia was defeated because he went up the martial ring early, Gao Feng would definitely blame himself. The first was even worse. End of this chapter. Chapter 850. The left minister Zhou Ming was a little surprised to see Lu Jia enter the martial arena, but he didn't hesitate to announce the start of the second match. In Zhou Ming's opinion, since the chief guard had accepted Lu Jia as her disciple, she would naturally increase Lu Jia's strength. Therefore, Lu Jia's strength was definitely different from when he was in the Radiance 100 sequence. Zhou Ming was very much looking forward to the strength that his young palace lord was about to display. After Lu Jia stepped onto the stage, many of the participants of the younger generation exclaimed in surprise. Everyone already knew Lu Jia's identity from the previous conflict with Miao Zhua. It was only the second match of the martial arena, and Lu Jia had already ascended the stage. How were they supposed to continue fighting? At this time, Gao Feng didn't immediately admit defeat and walk down the stage. Lu Jia said that he needed a few more battles before he could set up his formation. In that case, Lu Jia could be fully prepared for this battle. Of course, Gao Feng wouldn't say it out loud on the martial arena. Therefore, Gao Feng winked at Lu Jia and said, "Give me a few minutes to recover." After saying that, she winked at Wuxia and bent down to plant the breeze hibiscus, 2 spirit spring lilies, and 1 yellow spring lily on the ground. Then he commanded the yellow spring lily, which was already a little withered. Yellow spring lily use parasite seed recovery. Under Gao Feng's command, the withered yellow spring lily became even more shriveled. Finally, it turned into a seed and landed on the body of the spirit spring lily. The seed of the yellow spring lily directly took root on the stem of the spiritual spring lily and frantically absorbed the spiritual power within the spiritual spring lily. As the spiritual power inside the spirit spring lily's body was consumed, a tender bud grew out from the leaf stem where the yellow spring lily had turned into a seed. Immediately afterward, Gao Feng commanded the breeze hibiscus to control the spirit energy released by the other spirit spring lily and inject this spirit energy into the body of the spirit spring lily that was parasitized by the yellow spring lily seed. When the spirit chi of the breeze hibiscus was exhausted, the newly born yellow spring lily directly separated from the stem of the spirit spring lily. It could be said that Gao Feng had unknowingly shown Cicada Cry his potential again. Gao Feng's 2 spirit spring lilies were only Silver X/Legend phase. If the strength of the 2 spirit spring lilies increased, then the yellow spring lilies on the spirit spring lilies would most likely bloom. The blossoming of the yellow spring lily proved that it had recovered to its peak state. In this state, the yellow springs lily could cast yellow springs reincarnation again. Gao Feng's yellow spring lily was a fei that could increase the team's tolerance for mistakes. It had great strategic significance in the team. Now, Gao Feng directly proved that he could multiply the team's fault tolerance, and also multiply his strategic significance. Seeing this scene, the hesitation on the face of Cicada, who was sitting on the 13th chair in the inner palace of Yeong Palace, disappeared, and his eyes continued to be filled with smiles. They began to watch the upcoming duels with the attitude of a spectator. When Wuxia saw Gao Feng winking at him, he immediately understood what Gao Feng meant. In fact, Wuxia didn't need to set up a formation right away. He was very confident in his strength after his transformation. However, since Gao Feng had fought for this opportunity for him, Wuxia naturally wouldn't let down Gao Feng's good intentions. Wuxia, who was standing on the stage, snapped his fingers. After the snap, 30 shield ladybugs suddenly poured down from midair onto the stage. Lin Yuan, who was watching the duel, also wanted to know what level Wuxia's strength had reached. When he saw that the shield ladybugs that Wuxia had summoned had reached Diamond X, Lin Yuan knew that Wuxia must have gone through the coloration grade. Moreover, the Insect Queen's strength had also reached the current limit of B-rank Spirit Chi professionals, which was Diamond X. As for the Insect Queen's current fantasy rank, Lin Yuan had no way to find out, as a dimensional light moth was hovering above Wuxia's head. The dimensional light moth was an insect species carcinoma fei that Wuxia controlled. At that moment, this dimensional light moth's grade and quality were exactly the same as the dead soul caterpillar that Wuxia had summoned to control the orchid petal blade mantis. They were both Diamond X/Legend phase. This was also the grade limit of the Insect Queen's current control over insect species carcinoma phase. The dimensional light moth was an insect species carcinoma fei that fed on the dimensional walls. This caused dimensional rifts to appear in the places that the dimensional light moth had eaten. It was fine if the dimensional light moth did not eat too many dimensional walls in a space, as it would at most cause a class 1 dimensional rift. If the dimensional light moth were to crazily eat in a space, it might cause a class 3 dimensional rift to descend. However, class 4 and class 5 dimensional rifts weren't that simple. Even the dimensional light moth didn't have such a big stomach. However, a carcinoma fei like the dimensional light moth that could casually summon dimensional rifts was definitely not any less dangerous than the dead soul caterpillar that Wuxia had summoned previously. Furthermore, the dimensional light moth had another function. The abdomen of the dimensional light moth itself was a small dimensional space. At that moment, Wuxia's contracted insect queen was hidden in the dimensional light moth's abdomen. As long as the dimensional light moth wasn't killed, no one would be able to see Wuxia's insect queen. Wuxia's move stunned many of the disciples of the top and veteran forces below the martial arena. The sight of 30 Diamond X shield ladybugs standing in front of Wuxia was truly a shocking sight. A normal person would only be able to form a contract with 5 or 6 feis. What are you trying to do by summoning 30 fays at once? The shield ladybug was a defense-type insect species fey and did not have much offensive power. However, it would not be easy to kill all 30 diamond level 10 shield ladybugs. However, Wuxia clearly wasn't done. All of a sudden, an elegant and slender purple-black wasp fey appeared in his palm. Blade Queen Bee, go produce blade worms. Hearing Wuxia's command, the Blade Queen Bee flew like a sharp sword towards the 30 shield ladybugs in front of Wuxia. He used his tail to stab the vulnerable eyes of each ladybug. In less than a minute, the Blade Queen Bee had laid eggs in the bodies of all 30 shield ladybugs. After laying 30 eggs, the Blade Queen Bee landed on Wuxia's hand and looked a little withered as though its body had been hollowed out. The youths that were preparing to participate in the civil and martial duel arena were basically Class 3 creation masters. They naturally recognized that the dimensional light moth and the Blade Queen Bee that Wuxia had summoned were two insect species carcinoma fays. The second one was even more terrifying. End of this chapter. Chapter 851. When they saw Wuxia's dimensional light moths and Blade Queen Bees, many of them had goosebumps. Even if the younger generation of the veteran factions and pinnacle factions were experienced and knowledgeable, they had never seen any spirit chi professionals that could wantonly control a carcinoma fey in battle. The dimensional light moths, Blade Queen Bees, and the dead soul beetles that Wuxia had previously revealed proved that Wuxia had at least 3 carcinoma fays in his possession. It seemed like Wuxia himself was a terrifying disaster. However, everyone could not understand how these 30 shield ladybugs were produced. These 30 shield ladybugs were under Wuxia's control. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to form a neat phalanx in front of Wuxia like guards. At that moment, the bottom of the 30 shield ladybugs' carapaces started to move strangely, and the movement was getting faster and faster. This strange movement would cause one's scalp to go numb, but none of the 30 shield ladybugs showed any abnormalities. It was as though the movement did not originate from their bodies. All of a sudden, the heads of the 30 shield ladybugs burst open like watermelons, and a worm with purplish-black hair crawled out. At that moment, all 30 shield ladybugs lost their lives. The 30 worms that crawled out of the shield ladybugs' carapaces started to rapidly devour the shield ladybugs. In less than 2 minutes, the shield ladybugs, which were bigger than a round table, were completely devoured by the purplish-black worms. After the purplish-black worms devoured the shield ladybugs' carapaces, 30 uniform hisses echoed. The worms with purplish-black hair suddenly expanded and turned into 30 blade worms that were 6 meters long, 2 meters tall, and 3 meters wide. Their bodies were covered with black, blade-like horns. Lin Yuan frowned when he saw the situation. Theoretically, the blade worms produced by the Blade Queen Bee from a phase carapace should be a few grades lower than the phase grade when it was alive. But now, the blade worms produced by the Blade Queen Bee through the shield ladybugs did not decrease in grade. In fact, their aura was even stronger. Lin Yuan used true data to inspect the Blade Queen Bee on Wuxia's palm. Fey name: Blade Queen Bee Fey species, Stinger Wasp species / Progenitor Wasp species, Fey grade. Diamond 10 out of 10. Fey type: Insect / Spiritual Fey quality. Legend skills: Frowny face, wing blink. Instantly flaps its wings in the face of an attack, dodging in a flash manner. Cursed Bee venom: the mental venom contained within the body. Every time it is used on an enemy, it will cause a curse effect. The target that is cursed will enter an aging state, weakening their skin's defenses. Mother's cry: emits a special buzzing sound. Blade worms that hear the buzzing sound will enter a bloodthirsty state, breaking down the proteins stored in their body to quickly form black blade-like keratin, increasing the blade worm's overall aggressiveness. Disintegration infection: orders the heavily injured blade worm to disintegrate. The disintegrated blade worm will spray out the mental toxins in its body. At the same time, the disintegrated blade worm will double its strength for 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, the disintegrated blade worm will lose its life. Accelerated incubation: before injecting the worm eggs into the target's body, it will inject energy into the eggs in advance, allowing the eggs to incubate quickly. Queen True Body: fuse the queen's body into a blade worm's body, activating the sealed combat template in the queen's body to enter a combat state. Exclusive skill Frowny Face Vicious Wasp Queen. Allows a batch of eggs to kill each other in its stomach during incubation. The remaining eggs will not drop in grade when the parasitic Fae hatches a blade worm. Lin Yuan could not help but let out a sigh. Once a Cancer Fae was nurtured by a spirit chi professional in a certain way, it would break free from its original chaotic state. It would gain intelligence, abilities, and exclusive skills, and it would be much more terrifying than when it was in its wild state. If Lu Jie's insect queen was the master of an insect swarm, then the Blade Queen Bee would be the general that commanded the Blade Worm army. It could be said that most of the Blade Queen Bee's abilities were used to increase the Blade Worm's combat ability. At the same time, Lin Yuan also knew why the 30 Blade Worm's grades did not drop. It was just that Morbius was still in a deep slumber. If Morbius was awake, Lin Yuan would definitely complain to Morbius about the name of the Blade Queen Bee's exclusive skill. Vicious Wasp Queen sounded a little too strange, didn't it? Apart from that, the Blade Queen Bee had also maximized the mental toxin in its body, allowing the toxin to have a curse effect. In comparison, Lin Yuan was more interested in the Blade Queen Bee's diamond ability, Queen True Body. The Queen True Body could directly bestow the Blade Queen Bee with powerful single-target combat ability. Lin Yuan felt that it should be similar to Chime's Radiant Body. When Gao Feng saw Lu Jie's formation and the 30 ferocious blade worms, Gao Feng could not help but swallow his saliva. At the same time he put away his fei and said to Zhuiming, "Lord Zhuiming, I, Gao Feng, admit defeat." Lord Zhuiming, I, Gao Feng, admit defeat. The left palm minister did not find this strange at all. After receiving Lu Jie's nod, he dismissed Gao Feng from the arena. However, after Gao Feng retreated from the stage, the crowd saw Lu Jie's formation, and for a moment, no one was willing to step onto the stage. Everyone understood that as Chief Guard Ye's disciple, Lu Jie could not expose his full strength at this time. Other than the 30 blade worms, Lu Jie had yet to summon the orchid petal blade centipede controlled by the dead spirit caterpillar to the arena. The dead soul beetle was an insect-type carcinoma Fae that could cause damage to the soul. Moreover, as Chief Guard Ye's disciple, how could Lu Jie not have contracted a sacred source life form? Thus an interesting scene appeared. After a full 3 minutes, no one stepped onto the stage to face Lu Jie. The left minister, Zhuiming, raised his head and glanced in the direction of the inner palace. It was obvious that he was waiting for Night Leaning Moon to take action. At this time, a neutral voice came from the mobile phone on the chair in the middle of the Yeong Palace. "Qingyue, your disciple's fighting style is really interesting. Even this old man is getting more and more spirited. But such a good martial arena cannot be left unchallenged." Night Leaning Moon nodded slightly in response. The purpose of the civil arena, martial arena, and civil and martial arena was to see the strength of the younger generation from the veteran factions and the top factions. If no one stepped up, then the strength would naturally not be seen. Just as Night Leaning Moon was about to instruct Zhuiming, Iron Prison, who was beside Cicada Cry, spoke first. When Iron Prison spoke, he circulated the spiritual power in his body. Thus, his voice passed through the spirit guard's black crystal wall and reached the ears of everyone in the Yeong Palace's outer palace. "I, Iron Prison, am not a creation master. If my disciple is a creation master, then I will be misleading them. Thus, I plan to choose my disciple from the martial arena. Whoever defeats Chief Guard Ye's disciple will be my disciple." Third. End of this chapter. Chapter 852. Just as Tai Yu channeled the spiritual energy in his body to transmit his voice to the outer palace of Yeong Palace, the smile on Cicada's face could no longer be maintained. He could not help but turn his head to look at Iron Prison, revealing a speechless expression. Cicada Cry had always had a question, and that was, what was Iron Prison's brain made of? Half a year ago, a pinnacle Class 4 creation master in the outskirts of the royal capital caused the Moon Empress to make a move. Now, in this great Evernight assembly, he even publicly declared that, whoever defeats Night Leaning Moon's disciple will be accepted by my Iron Prison as my disciple. Cicada Cry simply didn't know what to say about Iron Prison's despicable behavior. Based on Cicada Cry's understanding of Iron Prison, He knew that Iron Prison definitely did not have any intention of intentionally targeting Night-Leaning Moon. However, in the eyes of others, this kind of brainless action was a provocation to Night-Leaning Moon. How could a disciple that Night-Leaning Moon had trained for a period of time be defeated so easily? Cicada Ming had privately advised Iron Prison countless times not to be so straightforward and to consider the ways of the world. However, Iron Prison only knew how to nod his head every time. He would throw his words to the back of his mind. Even if Night-Leaning Moon's temperament was softer than the Moon Empress, she still didn't have a good temper. Sure enough, while the cicada was in deep thought, Night-Leaning Moon's cold voice rang out. Hee, Iron Prison, I didn't know that your standards for accepting disciples are so high. I'm just afraid that your plan to find a disciple in the Nyx assembly will fail. Night-Leaning Moon furrowed her brows as she spoke. She was clearly talking to Iron Prison, but she did not even look at him. It was obvious that he despised the Iron Prison. Night-Leaning Moon felt that she shouldn't let a person like him, who had no EQ and didn't even know how to speak, appear in Yiyang Palace. However, since they were both His Majesty, it wouldn't be good for him to kick Iron Prison out right now. Upon hearing Night-Leaning Moon's words, Iron Prison was slightly startled. His face revealed a suspicious expression as though he was owed 2,500,000 radiance dollars. He didn't understand why Night-Leaning Moon was targeting him. Furthermore, the one who usually targeted him wasn't the Night-Leaning Moon but the Moon Empress. When he heard Night-Leaning Moon say that his plan to take in a disciple was about to fail, Iron Prison subconsciously replied. Since I want to accept a disciple, my plan to accept a disciple will not easily fail. Cicada Cry had been looking at Tai Yu's expression since he started speaking. He knew that Iron Prison wasn't purposely going against Night-Leaning Moon, he just answered her question without thinking. But no matter how he said it, it sounded like he was being stubborn. Night-Leaning Moon was also aware of Iron Prison's problem and had often helped Iron Prison and the Moon Empress to smooth things over. If it was any other time, Night-Leaning Moon wouldn't bother with Iron Prison. However, Night-Leaning Moon had just accepted a disciple. Iron Prison's words sounded like he was saying that his disciple was not strong enough and could be easily defeated in the martial arena. Iron Prison wanted to accept a disciple, but he had to use his own disciple as a stepping stone. It was simply hateful. Night-Leaning Moon furrowed her brows and pondered for a moment. Then her lightly furrowed brows relaxed. Since that's the case, Iron Prison, I'll make a bet with you. If someone can defeat my disciple in this martial arena, I'll pick a material to make a treasured artifact and give it to you as a congratulatory gift for accepting your disciple. However, if no one can defeat my disciple in the martial arena, and you don't accept a disciple, you'll have to hand over the disaster insectoid hive body you have. Even if Iron Prison didn't have any emotional intelligence, he now knew why Night-Leaning Moon was targeting him. However, even if Iron Prison didn't have any emotional intelligence, he still wanted to save face. If they were at the Imperial Court conference, Iron Prison might have given in. In any case, it wasn't embarrassing for his old friends to see him giving in. After all, he had to give in every time he argued with the Moon Empress. However, there were so many veteran factions and top-notch factions present in the inner palace of Nightfall Palace. Under such circumstances, Iron Prison couldn't just lower his head and give in. However, Iron Prison was somewhat reluctant to hand over the disaster insectoid hive body. It would be fine if he won, but if he lost, it would be the same as handing over a 6-star sacred source life-form material to make a treasured artifact. Iron Prison pondered for a while before speaking. A bet needs to be fair. Since you want my disaster insectoid hive body, you'll have to hand over a 6-star sacred source lifeforms material to me. Night-Leaning Moon let out a soft snort, nodded and ignored Iron Prison. The bet between the two was officially established with Night-Leaning Moon's nod. Cicada Cry looked at Iron Prison and wondered if Iron Prison was really a fool. The martial arena was not as valuable as the civil and martial arenas. Moreover, how could Night-Leaning Moon not know how many trump cards her disciple had? It would have been fine if Iron Prison had suggested the bet, but it was Night-Leaning Moon who had suggested it. Iron Prison actually dared to accept such a bet. Was he not afraid of losing his pants? Iron Prison sat on the 13th chair, wondering if there was a young fellow below the martial arena who could help him win the bet. He didn't expect that the Moon Empress, who usually ignored him, would suddenly speak to him. Iron Prison, since you're in the mood to bet, I'll also play a little. I heard that you recently obtained a sacred source life form. If you don't want to come, I'll bet on your sacred source life form. How about it? The Moon Empress words made Iron Prison's face darken. An uncontracted sacred source life form's value was completely different from a dead 6-star sacred source life form. A dead sacred source life form was a dead object after all. At best, it could only be used as a treasure. However, an uncontracted sacred source life form was equivalent to an unknown future. Iron Prison didn't dare to casually use such an item as a wager. Moreover, Iron Prison had agreed to Night Leaning Moon's bet for the sake of his reputation. Now that the Moon Empress wanted to join the bet, Iron Prison could naturally reject her. Just as Iron Prison was about to refuse, the Moon Empress spoke again. I also know that you still have 2 Fays stuck at that level. If I lose, I can help those 2 Fays break through that limit. I will bear the cost of the resources consumed. The Moon Empress words immediately made Iron Prison lose his cool. Even though Iron Prison and the Moon Empress were both Her Majesties, Iron Prison couldn't say such bold words. In the Radiance Federation, only the Moon Empress, the Bamboo Monarch, and Chef Supreme had the courage to say such words. Now that the Bamboo Monarch was plagued by misfortune because of a woman, it was obvious that he had lost the capital to say such words. Experts at Iron Prison's level would form a perfect combat system between Fays. If the 2 weakest Fays could break through that limit and complete their metamorphosis, their overall strength would receive a comprehensive increase. Even if there was only a trace of such an opportunity, Iron Prison wouldn't reject it. The first was even better. End of this chapter. Chapter 853. Iron Prison knew that even if he brought resources to the Moon Empress for help, the Moon Empress would not be willing to enhance his phase. Iron Prison might be stubborn, but he knew that the Moon Empress was annoyed with him. I accept the bet. Iron Prison, Chief Guard Yi, and the Moon Empress wager made the veteran and Pinnacle factions leaders' scalp tingle. Was this the world of the big shots? It turned out that the world of the big shots was so boring and plain. They had casually placed bets on treasures, materials, and sacred source life forms as their wagers. Sacred source life forms were something that the veteran factions could not obtain even if they sold everything they had. Even among the Pinnacle factions, only the strongest member of the family was qualified to possess it. When Iron Prison and the Moon Empress Night Leaning Moon made the wager, the veteran and Pinnacle factions' disciples, who were originally hesitating, became excited when they heard Iron Prison's words. On the stage, Lu Jie's face froze behind the Spirit Guard's standard mask. He knew that after Iron Prison said this, the person who challenged him would definitely go crazy. However, Lu Jie was not nervous at all. On the contrary, his opponent's craziness was exactly what he wanted. Only a powerful opponent could let Lu Jie clearly understand how strong he was and where his limits were. Soon, another challenger entered the martial ring. Seeing this, Zhou Ming immediately announced the start of the 3rd round of the martial ring. The 3rd person to enter the arena felt that he had been too impulsive when he saw the 30 blade worms in front of Lu Jie. However, Iron Prison's words made it hard for him not to be impulsive. The youth immediately summoned his contracted phase. Upon seeing this, Lin Yuan used true data to check the 3 tiger phase that the youth had summoned. Tiger species phase had potential that was comparable to dragon species phase. However, compared to the huge variety of dragon species phase, tiger phase were much rarer. 2 of the 3 tiger phase that the youth had contracted had already become fantasy breed phase. Among them, the strongest tiger species Fae had reached Diamond Eye/Fantasy Eye. Such strength was obviously much stronger than Wang En, who had just fought with Gao Feng. If they were to really fight, this youth who had contracted 3 tiger species Faes would at least be able to beat Wang En and the others. The strength of these 3 tiger species Faes was barely enough to contend with the 30 Diamond X blade worms that Lu Jie had displayed. The Blade Queen Bee's exclusive skill, Vicious Wasp Queen, could ensure that the blade worm's grades would not drop, but after the transformation, each Diamond X blade worm was equivalent to a flawless Fae. Each Diamond X blade worm was comparable to a Platinum 3/Fantasy Eye Fae in terms of strength. The moment the 3 tiger species Faes were summoned, the 30 Platinum 3/Fantasy Eye Blade Worms clashed with the youth's 2 Fantasy Breed Tiger Species Fays. The youth's strongest Diamond Eye/Fantasy Eye Tiger Species Fay was undoubtedly much stronger than Zhou Luo's contracted Lava Dragon Lizard. However, the Lava Dragon Lizard was a defense-type Fay, and it could rely on its shield to effectively defend against the Blade Worm's attacks with its sharp horns. Zhou Luo had been able to rely on the Lava Dragon Lizard to defeat so many Blade Worms because of its exclusive skill, Unyielding Iron Bones, which could increase its defense every time it received an attack. On the other hand, it was because Lin Yuan had given Zhou Luo a large number of Fire-type and Earth-type Heavenly Maiden-grade elemental pearls. This allowed Zhou Luo to use pure elemental energy and the Lava Dragon Lizard's shield regeneration to increase his endurance in battle. The youth's contracted Tiger Species Fay was a power offense-type Fay with relatively weak defense. Every time it swung its claws at the Blade Worm, the claws would be cut by the Blade Worm's black cuticle. Such injuries were nothing to a Diamond Eye/Fantasy Eye Tiger Species Fay. However, through the Blade Queen Bee's ability, Curse Bee Venom, every time the Blade Queen Bee's horn-like damage was dealt, it would constantly add mental poison and curse effects to the Tiger Fay's body. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, Lu Jia gently waved his hand. He immediately released 5 shield ladybugs from the dimensional light moth's body, and they joined the battle to protect the Blade Worms and attack the Tiger Species Fay. The ferocious Tiger Species Fay slowly fell into a disadvantage under the insect swarm's attack. Finally, Lu Jia commanded the Blade Queen Bee to use Disintegrate Infection on a severely injured Blade Worm that had lost its ability to fight. A large amount of mental poison sprayed on the Tiger Species Fay. The Tiger Species Fay was already starting to weaken due to the mental poison's interference. In addition, there were countless layers of curse effects on the Tiger Species Fay. The Diamond Eye/Fantasy Eye Tiger Species Fay was knocked to the ground by the Blade Worm that had increased its strength by several times due to Disintegrate Infection. Seeing that its contracted Fay had lost the ability to resist and was no longer a threat to Lu Jia, the youth immediately chose to admit defeat. The youth standing opposite Lu Jia immediately chose to admit defeat. After the young man left the arena, one of the Blade Worms that had been in a neat formation was now dead, and 7 were lying on the ground with serious injuries. The remaining 23 were also injured. 5 of the shield ladybugs that had joined the battle had been torn to shreds by the sharp claws and were no longer breathing. Lu Jia did not panic at all after experiencing the battle. He stood behind the Blade Worms with a calm expression. This scene also caused the younger generation of the veteran forces and top forces below the martial ring to become excited. Du Shuo and a few other youths were exchanging glances. Everyone could see the current situation of the martial ring. Although the weaker members of the veteran factions and the top factions would not be able to defeat Lu Jia, they would be able to injure Lu Jia's Blade Worms. Based on the current situation, the Blade Queen Bee's injuries could not be healed by the Blade Queen Bee. Furthermore, the Blade Queen Bee would need a long time to lay eggs every time. In the martial ring, the Blade Queen Bee would not be given a second chance to lay eggs. Hence, taking turns to fight against the Blade Worms was the best option. Thus, with Du Shuo as the leader, the youths dispersed and headed towards the other participants of the martial ring. These youths were all from the top factions. Very quickly, under the persuasion of these youths, the veteran forces and the disciples of the top forces below the martial arena united. It would not be easy for the weaker participants to kill Lu Jia. Hence, these youths became the best candidates for taking turns to wear down the Blade Worms. The second was even better. End of this chapter. Chapter 854. The rest of the stronger participants were free to pick and choose when to step onto the stage. The method of persuasion was simple. There was no one in the younger generation who didn't want to become Her Majesty's disciple. Most of the weaker ones came from older factions. As long as they offered enough benefits, it was a win-win situation for them. Zhuo Ming, the left minister, was a little displeased, but he didn't say anything. This kind of behavior was very targeted at Lu Jia. It was like a group of brave warriors fighting a demon king boss. However, this kind of behavior didn't violate the rules of the martial arena. As the left minister under Chief Guard Yi, Zhuo Ming had to maintain his composure. He couldn't make things difficult for Wuxia just because he was being targeted by the younger generation. Soon, the hesitant disciples of the veteran forces ascended the martial ring one after another, from the weakest to the strongest. Wuxia ordered the Blade Queen Bee to cast Mother's Cry and Deconstruction Infection on the blade worms that were still alive but no longer able to fight. Normally, he would need to use up to 3 to 4 blade worms to defeat each opponent. As more and more people stepped onto the stage to challenge Wuxia, more and more blade worms were consumed. The eyes of the participants below the stage grew brighter and brighter. However, Wuxia didn't budge. By the time Wuxia knocked the 8th opponent out of the arena, all 30 blade worms were dead. The blade worm carcasses piled up on the stage. It was a gruesome and bloody sight. When the 9th challenger stepped onto the stage, Wuxia raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Wuxia snapped his fingers and a black ball appeared next to his feet. This ball looked like a ball made up of striped worms and it was squirming violently at this time. This scene shocked the participants who had just stepped onto the stage. It also made the hearts of the older factions and top faction disciples who thought they had seen hope sink. When Zhou Ming announced the start of the battle, Wuxia looked down at the wriggling black ball at his feet. Use liquid mycelium, striped division, remnant body control and saprophytic bacteria. Wuxia issued 4 commands in one breath, and the black ball sprayed out a large amount of purple mucus under his command. This purple mucus seemed to be alive and had extremely strong extensibility. In just a moment, it had covered the entire area of the martial ring. Then the thin layer of mucus carpet began to grow densely packed tiny black threads. These black threads were like capillaries swimming and splitting rapidly in the purple mucus. As the purple liquid spread out, it naturally covered the dead blade worms and shield ladybugs. The 30 dead blade worms and shield ladybugs immediately began to change after being enveloped by the purple liquid. A large number of black threads drilled into the bodies of the dead blade worms and shield ladybugs. In the blink of an eye, the 30 blade worms and the 5 shield ladybugs were covered in a layer of purple slime and black silk. The armor caused the blade worms and shield ladybugs' bodies to suddenly grow bigger. Black blisters appeared on the black armor. When the blisters burst, they formed a mucus that looked like small white flowers covering the armor's surface, emitting a rancid smell. At that moment, the wriggling black ball at Wuxia's feet had disappeared, and the 30 blade worms and 5 shield ladybugs had shakily stood up. They continued to form a formation in front of Wuxia like guards. However, the blade worms and shield ladybugs that had become terrifying and disgusting now seemed to be stronger than when they were alive. Wuxia's opponent was unable to block the swarm's attack and was knocked off the stage in a few minutes. However, the contestant's fate looked a little too miserable. There was not a single piece of intact flesh on the huge dinosaur Fei's body. Every wound that was pierced by the edge of the knife was festering towards the torso for some unknown reason. The 2 healing-type spirit chi professionals that Zhou Ming had found were wearing the spirit guard's uniform. After a long time they finally healed the Fei's. At that moment Du Shuo, who had become the core of the crowd, exclaimed in shock. These are actually the mycelium tapeworms of the insect-type carcinoma Fei. Du Shuo's words completely extinguished the hopes of the other challengers below the martial ring. Most of them were veterans and the younger generation of the top factions. They naturally knew what kind of Fei the mycelium tapeworms were. It could be said that the appearance of the mycelium tapeworms had made the previous round of fights a joke. Lin Yuan was also using true data to check the mycelium tapeworms data. Fei name: Mycelium tapeworm, Fei species. Hookmouth genus/nematode species, Fei grade. Diamond 10 out of 10. Fei type: insect/dark, Fei quality. Legend abilities: frowny face, liquid mycelium. Rapidly secrete mucus and cover a certain area with mucus. It will cause the bacteria in the mucus to rapidly divide into a large number of reticular mycelium. Strip division: burrow into the liquid mycelium and undergo high-speed division, dispersing the body into tiny tapeworms that are rooted in any part of the mycelium. Mutilated body control: the mycelium infects the flesh that has lost its life and covers the surface of the flesh. The mycelium twines to form a highly toxic mycelium armor. When the mycelium forms an armor on the mutilated body, the split tapeworms can enter the mutilated body and control it. Saprophytic bacteria: a highly corrosive bacteria that will proliferate on the mutilated body. When the bacteria come into contact with fresh cells, it will cause the fresh cells to rot. Mutilated body integration. When the mutilated body suffers destructive damage, the ladybugs that are born will use themselves as nutrients to breed the mycelium. The mycelium will stitch up the mutilated body, and the newly split tapeworms will control the mutilated body. Duplex parasitism. When another parasitic life form has a parasitic body, the mutilated body, the mycelium and the tapeworms inside can be sacrificed to enhance the strength of the parasitic life form. When the parasitic life form is injured, the energy obtained from the sacrifice can be used to heal the parasitic fey. Exclusive skill frowny face mutilated body reproduction. The bacteria can modify the reproduction and gender in the mutilated body's genes. It can allow the mutilated body controlled by the bacteria to reproduce into a new individual through mycelium division. Lin Yuan's eyes could not help but widen. Lu Jia had yet to display the true power of the cancer fey mycelium tapeworm. At that moment Lu Jia, who was standing on the martial ring, looked at the audience and spoke in a clear voice. Third. End of this chapter. Chapter 855. The next battle will involve the soul and I am unable to control the depth of my attacks. If you get hit, even if you are healed in the end, you will still have to suffer a little. After speaking, a flickering soul shadow suddenly appeared on Lu Jia's shoulder. Finally, these orchid-like flickering souls gathered into a petite and elegant praying mantis that looked like an orchid. After seeing this petite and elegant praying mantis, the other challengers below the martial ring had a grave expression. When Lu Jia had ascended the martial ring to fight, he had summoned a total of 3 carcinoma fays. They were the dimensional light moth, the blade queen bee and the mycelium tapeworm. However, during the previous conflict, everyone knew that the mycelium tapeworm that Lu Jia had just summoned was the 4th insect-type carcinoma fey that he had summoned. The dead soul caterpillar that Lu Jia had summoned earlier had yet to be summoned to participate in the fight. The dead soul caterpillar was an insect-type carcinoma fey that mainly targeted the soul. Therefore its attacks were very hard to defend against. The pain of the soul injury wasn't something that a regular person could endure. This caused the challengers below the martial ring to have the intention to retreat. The appearance of the mycelium tapeworm proved that it was a joke to use the tactic of taking turns to wear Lu Jia down. The challengers who were supposed to be taking turns compared their overall strength and realized that it was barely possible for them to defeat the resurrected insects. Furthermore, who knew if Lu Jia still had other insect-type carcinoma fays that he had yet to summon? Compared to the serious expressions of the challengers below the martial ring, the youths who were going to participate in the civil and martial ring matches had different expressions. At that moment, the youths who were going to participate in the cultural relic dual ring matches had serious expressions and were also astonished. There were basically no creation masters among the challengers participating in the martial ring matches. Even if there were creation masters, their strength would only be below class 2. It was truly a stretch for such a creation master to detect the Diamond X/Legend mycelium tapeworm. The youths who were going to participate in the civil and martial ring matches were all at least class 3. Therefore they could vaguely detect the mycelium tapeworm's abilities and exclusive skills. The younger generation participating in both the civil and martial arenas were keenly aware that the mycelium tapeworm summoned by Lu Jia could actually coordinate with the dead soul caterpillar, achieving a complementary effect. The dead soul caterpillar was currently controlling the orchid petal blade cheese body, but it was not bound to the orchid petal blade cheese body. To put it bluntly, the orchid petal blade centipede's body was just a coat for the dead soul centipede, which could be changed at any time. The mycelium tapeworm's diamond rank skill, double parasitism, allowed the dead soul centipede to parasitize any blade worm or shield ladybug that had been infected by the bacterium. Coupled with the effect of the dead soul caterpillar's elite skill, the dead soul caterpillar could freely shuttle between each individual in the swarm. In any collision in battle, the dead soul caterpillar could suddenly appear like a nightmarish specter and absorb the soul of the target it was fighting. Moreover, there was no way to defend against the dead soul caterpillar's soul explosion bullet. Even if one could withstand the damage from the explosion, There was a high possibility that a soul seed would be planted in the brain of the battling Fae or even the spirit chi professional's brain during the process. As a carcinoma Fae, the dead soul caterpillar's terror level was no laughing matter. With a soul seed parasitized in one's brain, one's life and death were basically in the hands of the dead soul caterpillar. Miao Zhuo clearly had a treasure to protect his soul, but he was unable to resist the dead soul caterpillar's soul absorption. It was evident how powerful the dead soul caterpillar's control over the soul was. However, none of the challengers wished for their soul to be damaged like Miao Zhuo. Apart from the spirit chi professionals who believed that their strength was weaker than Lu Jie's insect swarm, even those challengers who were on par with Lu Jie's insect swarm did not have any means to protect their soul. Hence, the fire in their hearts was extinguished. Gao Feng retreated from the martial ring and stood beside Lin Yuan. When he saw that Lu Jie's insect swarm was getting stronger, he could not help but pat Lin Yuan's shoulder and say, "Lin Yuan, the young palace lord is too strong. Lin Yuan, the young palace master is too strong. With such strength, I really can't imagine how he can be defeated." Upon hearing Gao Feng's exclamation, Lin Yuan revealed a trace of a smile. He was happy for Lu Jie's strength. Lin Yuan knew that Lu Jie currently controlled a total of 8 insect-type carcinoma phase. However, Lu Jie had only summoned half of them. Lu Jie had sealed the insect queen's ability from the start of the battle and allowed it to hide within the dimensional light moth's body. At first he only allowed the insect queen to produce 30 shield ladybugs as hosts for the blade queen bee to produce blade worms. Afterward he only allowed the insect queen bee to produce 5 shield ladybugs in order to increase the blade worm swarm's defense. If Lu Jie was willing to release the insect queen, the blade queen bee would not be able to produce eggs in the following battles. With the insect queen working with the mycelium tapeworms and the pervasive dead soul caterpillars, its overall strength would increase by multiple folds. Lu Jie's insect queen was now a Diamond X/fantasy breed fairy-type source-type life form. The insect species phase produced by each insect queen could reach the strength of Diamond X/flawless. A sea of insects made up of Diamond X/flawless insect species phase was a terrifying existence just by thinking about it. However, Lin Yuan did not agree with what Gao Feng had said. Lu Jie might be strong, but he was not so strong that he could not be defeated. Take Lin Yuan for example. If he were to enter the martial arena now, he would be able to destroy Lu Jie's insect swarm with just Spirit Essence Burst. Lin Yuan's Spirit Essence Burst focused on gathering spirit qi into a single point for an instant burst of power. It consumed very little spiritual power. In addition, the dead soul caterpillar's soul attack was useless against someone like Lin Yuan, who had contracted a sacred source life form. A sacred source life form that had formed a marrow contract with a spirit chi professional normally resided in the depths of the spirit chi professional's soul. The existence of a sacred source life form was the best way to protect the soul. Furthermore, Lin Yuan had the support of the myth 3 vicious venom law, which gave him near-perfect resistance against the mycelium tapeworm's saprophytic bacteria ability. Lu Jie had yet to display his full strength, so Lin Yuan did not know how strong Lu Jie's sacred source life form was. In such a situation, if Lin Yuan and Lu Jie wanted to determine the victor, it would depend on whether Lu Jie could withstand Lin Yuan's trump card, the Jackdaw Withering Strike, which was produced by the Death Law world. Gao Feng marveled at Lu Jie's strength while observing the reactions of the other challengers below the martial arena. Suddenly, a strange thought arose in his mind. First, even more. End of this chapter. Chapter 856. If Lu Jie continued his winning streak, it would end at the end of the combat ring. Then, as the only person with a winning streak on the combat ring, Gao Feng would become the second place and receive the combat ring's reward. At the thought of this, Gao Feng couldn't help but laugh out loud. In the martial arena, one couldn't just forfeit without participating in the competition. Otherwise, Gao Feng wouldn't have been so conflicted back then. As soon as the 10th challenger entered the combat ring, he chose to admit defeat without summoning his Fae. After admitting defeat, the 10th challenger stared at Lu Jie nervously as though he was afraid that Lu Jie wouldn't agree to it. Lu Jie wasn't a cruel person, so he didn't reject his opponent's understanding. After the first challenger chose to admit defeat on the martial ring, A group of challengers lined up and rushed to the martial ring to admit defeat. There were only 75 veteran factions and top factions younger generation participating in the combat ring. Once they admitted defeat, there were less than 10 challengers left standing below the combat ring. Among them was Du Shuo, who had spoken rudely to Wuxia and had been rescued by him. Du Shuo stood in the middle of these challengers as if he was the leader of these challengers. Looking at Wuxia, who was controlling the insect swarm, Du Shuo took a deep breath and walked toward the combat ring. When Zhou Ming saw Du Shuo enter the combat ring, he snorted and said, "The 61st match of the combat ring officially begins." The 61st match of the combat ring officially begins. Wuxia didn't make a move for close to 50 matches. He merely nodded repeatedly to allow his opponent to admit defeat. This made Wuxia feel like a silly pillar standing on the combat ring. Wuxia was slightly stunned when he saw his opponent enter the combat ring. This was because Wuxia knew the opponent in front of him and had a conflict with him previously. Wuxia might have a good temper and didn't let Zhou Ming deal with Du Shuo back then. However, Wuxia didn't have a good impression of Du Shuo, who had contradicted him. Just as Wuxia was about to order the insect swarm to attack, Du Shuo shouted from the opposite side of the combat ring, "Young Palace Lord, don't be in a hurry to fight. Young Palace Master, don't be in such a hurry to fight. I would like to apologize to Young Palace Master here. I was wrong to offend Young Palace Master with my words. Young Palace Lord is magnanimous and forgave me and didn't pursue my responsibility. But I, Du Shuo, don't feel justified if I don't apologize." Du Shuo kept his back bent as he spoke. He only raised his head and looked at Wuxia sincerely after he finished speaking. On one hand, Du Shuo was truly grateful that Wuxia did not pursue the matter. Otherwise, he would have been thrown out of Yeong Palace. On the other hand, Du Shuo also understood that the conflict that had happened in the outer palace of Yeong Palace had been witnessed by many of the younger generation of the old and top forces. It was impossible to hide it. Sooner or later, the elders of the clan would know that he had spoken rudely to Bureau Chief Ye's disciple. Rather than waiting for the elders of the clan to find out and be punished, it was better to take this opportunity to say it out directly. If he took all the responsibility, he would not implicate Feng He. If he was lucky enough to obtain Wuxia's forgiveness, then the punishment he would receive upon returning to Hearthstone would not be as severe. After hearing Du Shuo's words, Wuxia's face behind the mask was very calm. "It doesn't matter. I didn't take this matter to heart, so there's no need to talk about forgiveness. If there's a chance in the future we can communicate more." Du Shuo clenched his fists tightly when he heard Wuxia's words. He looked at Wuxia with gratitude once again. Wuxia's words meant that Wuxia did not care about his rebuttal at all, which was equivalent to him not admitting to the conflict. This directly exempted him from the punishment he would receive upon returning to the clan. At the same time, Wuxia's invitation to communicate more was equivalent to Du Shuo turning an enemy into a friend. However, Du Shuo knew that even if he was a core member of the top 10 forces, he was not worthy of being Wuxia's enemy. At this moment, Du Shuo could not help but admire Wuxia's magnanimity. Du Shuo said awkwardly as he recalled how he had fought Wuxia in consecutive battles. "Young Palace Master, I was thinking of taking turns to attack your Blade Worm horde so that they would continue to lose members. But I didn't expect your swarm to grow stronger." Wuxia laughed heartily when he heard Du Shuo's words. Without the accumulation of consecutive battles, it would not have been easy for him to display his current strength. Zhou Ming could not help but feel a little unhappy when he saw Du Shuo's small group trying to persuade the other challengers to take turns to challenge Wuxia. However, Zhou Ming did not expect Du Shuo to be so magnanimous as to tell Wuxia about the previous consecutive battles. Zhou Ming could not help but change his opinion of Du Shuo. At that moment, Zhou Ming saw Gulang returning to the outer palace from the literary arena through the long corridor. Zhou Ming could not help but feel a raging wave in his heart. No one knew better than Zhou Ming how difficult the literary arena's questions were. Zhou Ming had checked every question in advance. These questions were painstakingly designed to test the creation master's comprehensive qualities in all aspects. None of the questions could be easily completed. In order to match the time and allow the literary arena and the martial arena to end at the same time, apart from controlling the difficulty of the literary arena's questions, Each question had a huge workload. The martial arena was indeed about to end, but this was because Lu Jia was the second to enter the martial arena and began to sweep through all the challengers. In addition, the 50 challengers had chosen their opponents as soon as they entered the martial arena. From the start of the martial arena until now, the martial arena had only used half an hour. In other words, Gu Lang had only used half an hour to complete the literary arena's questions that were randomly selected. This speed was simply too fast. Gu Lang was indeed the Bamboo Monarch's disciple. The Bamboo Monarch was not surprised to see that Gu Lang was the first to complete the literary arena's competition. However, the Bamboo Monarch felt that it was a pity that Gu Lang did not participate in the martial and civil arenas. The Bamboo Monarch had participated in setting the rules for the martial and civil arenas. A large part of the reason why the Bamboo Monarch had set the rules for the martial arena was to take care of his disciples' one-wave style's fighting style. After Gu Lang returned, he immediately went to Zhongzai's side. Seeing that Zhongzai was staring at the martial arena with fanatical eyes, Gu Lang could not help but reach out to knock on Zhongzai's half-body armor. However, Gu Lang realized that his action of knocking on the half-body armor did not make Zhongzai come back to his senses. Gu Lang sighed. Zhongzai might be strong, but if he did not change his battle maniac habit, it would eventually be a bad thing. Gu Lang knew that he could not change Zhongzai's bad habit, but he sincerely hoped that someone could change Zhongzai's battle maniac habit in the future. Otherwise, the impulsive and battle maniac Zhongzai would never be able to blend into a 5-man squad and was destined to never become a Radiance envoy. The second was even better. End of this chapter. That you're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.